It's on. It's on. Jason. So if you it's on. Okay.
Good evening. I think we've overcome our technology issue here. So with that said, with it being 6:35, I'm happy to call the Board of Education meeting for the Francis Howell School District to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. This evening it will be led by Henry Philippik from Boy Scout Troop 957.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Henry. Board, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
So moved. Second.
I have a first and a second. All of those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All of those opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda is recognitions. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dykeman.
Thank you, Mrs. Coe. While the Francis Howell Transportation Department is new this year, what's not new is the dedication and skill of many of our bus drivers. For Hannah Scharfenberg, driving a bus is more than just a job. It's a mission to keep students safe during the commute to school. Each year, she participates in safety bus competitions to continue her growth as a driver. In June, she won the 2019 State School Bus Safety Competition hosted by the Missouri Association for Pupil Transportation. We have a tradition for recognizing all of our state champions. This is a first, however. We've never recognized a state champion bus driver. As a state champion, Hannah earned the right to compete in the annual School Bus Driver International Safety Competition hosted by NSTA, where she placed 5th in the nation. The annual competitions provide an opportunity for drivers to improve their skills and knowledge regarding student and bus safety. Participants compete in both written and driving tests that examine a variety of ability areas. Our bus drivers are often the first friendly face our students see in the morning and often the last one they see at the end of a long day. It's reassuring to know that we have bus drivers like Hannah who strive to know our students and keep them safe every day. Congratulations, Hannah. There are literally thousands of great schools in Missouri, and most of them are very, very good schools. But only 8 from across the state have been named 2019 Gold Star schools by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. 3 of those 8 are Francis Howell schools. Here to honor those 3 is Dr. Maureen Clancy May from the DESE Office of Quality Schools.
Good evening, Board of Education, parents, staff members. Appreciate the opportunity to come here before you and share in this honor. I just want to say a couple things. First, if you've never filled out an application for Gold Star, it is a tremendous amount of work, and I applaud all of the faculty and staff, the students, the parents, the leadership. It takes a tremendous amount of work, and it's truly a testament to great leadership, effective instruction, just hardcore student performance, support, culture, climate that just supports the whole teaching and learning process and what's right for all the students in the schools. So couldn't be more proud of the work that goes into it. As a former teacher, principal, and superintendent, I know I was sharing with your principals over there, I could never talk my principals into applying for this, even though I felt they worked hard. And to have Francis Howell be the first in St. Charles County, and then to have 3 schools, that's a tremendous honor. So congratulations to everyone here that's affiliated with that, to you for your leadership. It is a tremendous honor.
So first we have the staff and some representatives from Becky David Elementary.
One by one.
I think one school bus. Maureen, we get the picture too.
Shift a little bit.
Am I too long?
I can switch with you, Sarah.
You switch, okay.
The tallest one, the shortest, sorry.
I'll look.
Thank you. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm going to use for Sarah. Amazing job.
Next are representatives from Daniel Boone Elementary.
Switch it up. We're switching it up. Thank you.
And finally, our representatives from Warren Elementary School.
That's why I want to say excellent.
Just over the black in the middle.
You stand.
Have that front row seat and just over there. There we go.
Our thanks to Desi and Dr. Maureen Clancy May for making the trip and recognizing our Gold Star schools. Thank you, Mrs. Cope.
Thank you. That is exciting news. So I just want to make sure that I understand this right. We are the first in St. Charles County to receive this award, and out of 8, we have 3. I just want to hone in on those points real quick.
The
That's so
Lutheran school
exciting.
up the street would be a little upset, so we're the first public schools.
First public school, thank you. Next on our agenda is patron comments. So during patron comments, patrons are invited to address the Board of Education. Please come to the podium so everyone can hear. Please adhere to the 3-minute time limit. The board is interested in hearing the public's concerns and opinions, but we do not answer patrons' questions during our meeting. Questions and concerns will be addressed by Dr. Mary Hendricks Harris and other appropriate staff members. Please remember that comments about individual students and staff are not allowed due to confidentiality. These concerns need to be brought up to the administrator's attention and may be brought to the board in a closed session. So with that, we do have one patron comment this evening. I'd like to invite up Matthew Reed Easterling.
Ladies and gentlemen of the school board, and ladies and gentlemen of Francis Howell School District. I'm a junior at Francis Howell Central High School and a member of the choir program there. I come before you today to address the charging of an activity fee to participate in choir. If you don't know, to be a member of a curricular choir, a choir that meets during the school day, that you get a grade for, that is part of your schedule, and that goes on your permanent transcript, you must pay the $40 activity fee along with the choir fee, which is $40 at Howell Central, roughly $100 at Francis Howell, and nearly $200 at Howell North, each for chamber choir. And each of these have a scholarship or fundraiser option for those who can't afford it. However, the $40 activity fee does not have these options, and this is extremely unfair to many students, especially those who cannot afford it. Firstly, there are students being forced to drop choir because they cannot afford this fee for a curricular choir. And while the choir fee has fundraising options and offers scholarships, the activity fee does not. This leads to students having to choose between choir and essentials. The choir program is one of the most diverse programs in the district. And Mrs. Baird, my choir director at Howell Central, portrayed this perfectly when she told us, some people here live in $1 million homes and some people here are homeless. This diversity, however, is put into jeopardy when the activity fee is levied for choir, and this is unacceptable. Next, by charging this fee, the district withholds a fine arts education from all students who can't afford this activity fee. And a fine arts education is one of the most important things a student can get. It has changed my life. It not only improves overall academic performance, but it also promotes self-esteem and creativity. However, by charging the activity fee, the district once again withholds these benefits from its most disadvantaged students. Next, the Francis Howell School District, we should highlight, is a public school district. Students shouldn't have to pay to receive an education here, at least without any option to fundraise or get a scholarship. And however, charging the activity fee for these curricular choirs does exactly this, and that needs to change. The district's job is to educate students. The logo behind you says learning together, and yet this can't be done with this fee is charged, as we do not learn together when students with a passion have that passion cruelly smothered when they can't afford this activity fee. So I ask you today, on behalf of the choir program, to stop charging the activity fee for a class, or at the very least, to implement a scholarship or fundraiser option. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Easterling. FHEA?
Sorry, I just hit it.
Good evening, board, Dr. Hendricks Harris and cabinet. I just wanted to say we raised a little over $8,000 at Friends of Children. We also got a donation from Tri-County Labor Organization for $500 for Friends of Children. That's the same organization that donated to the Lunch Heroes. So I wanted to make mention of that, and I want to just, I know I already talked to the teachers, and so welcome everybody back, and it's been, I think, a great start so far. So thank you.
FESPA? Board, next on our agenda is the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented for August 15th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
I have a first and a second. I recorded Mrs. Walker and Mr. Lane. All of those in favor? Aye. All of those opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda, under academic high target, we have one of our best practices, looking at our nurses and their role in the schools. Dr. Vanderpool?
Thank you all for allowing us to be here tonight to share some of the great things that our school nurses do every day for our kids. I'm going to introduce Nurse Barb, our nurse lead coordinator, and let her share some of the things and highlight especially what we did last year and what we plan to do this year.
Thank you, everyone. I want to just kind of start with our current reality and look at some of the nurses that we have. We have 2 full-time nurses that travel between 3 early childhood schools. We have a full-time nurse and a part-time nurse in 8 of our elementary schools, and 2 nurses in 2 of our elementary schools. We just added Warren to 2 full-time nurses. We have a middle school nurse, a nurse in every middle school, and we added a float nurse, and we have 2 full-time nurses in every high school. I wanted to just thank the board and the powers that be here for looking at our acuity and our numbers as they have seriously grown to allow us to increase our staffing to meet the needs. We have numerous diabetics in the district, and today's technology uses pumps and computers and everything, and it takes a lot more for the nurses to make sure that they're safe through the day. We are also having a lot of more medically complex students in our schools, and they take our time, as well as a lot more actual office visits. And I believe the next slide will show, these are the end visits for last year. So we had 3,200 visits for early childhood, and if you look at elementary, of the 10 elementary schools, we had a total of 101,000 visits, okay? Middle school, 39,100. High school's 34,600. I just wanted to share a little bit that in the 5 days that we have been here, one elementary school already has seen over 350 students and saw 85 students today. That's unheard of. I mean, you know, typical day would be at the first beginning of the year, maybe 30, 45 students. So as our acuity or the level of illness these students have, also our numbers are increasing a lot. So these numbers will be a lot higher at the end of the year, this year. And then I wanted to focus on some of the areas that we accomplished, some of the things we accomplished last year. We updated all of the district AEDs as they had outlived their lifespan. We increased the number of nurses that are CPR instructors to help train other team members. We standardized a lot of nursing forms so that the same form is given out throughout the district, and then we will continue to do that. We trained staff and students in hands-on CPR. We trained a lot. The high school nurses really got into this and trained a lot of the seniors for the part of their academic expectations. And then as we continue to grow, some of our professional development days included Stop the Bleed, so those are for large traumas, sanctuary training, trauma training, brain architecture, where we learn that early trauma, how it affects student-child development and academic development, and how that ties in with their medical needs and what we can do. We also had We had a class on eating disorders and how to support those students, and transgender students and supporting those in our schools. This year, our focus continues to be on our community, getting our immunizations up to date, making sure parents and students understand the importance of the immunizations and what they really are. We'd like to bring our vision van back. We gave out 75 pairs of glasses last year. We'd like to continue our dental care program that is in most of our elementary schools, where they get teeth cleaning and filling cavities and that. And we also have an oral health program where a hygienist comes in and gives them a fluoride treatment. We have developed a new orientation program. It's more of a check-off list, and that again is for consistency. We are going to establish or update and really establish a district-wide diabetic protocol. As the needs of the diabetics are changing rapidly, we feel like we need to be there to make sure our protocols meet those needs and meet their challenges. And then we want to take the National Association of School Nurses framework for the 21st Century School Nursing Care Program, and that really looks at moving forward in 21st century nursing. This is a copy of it, and you can see it's student-centered, and then it's encompassed in the school nurse standards of practice. It involves care coordination, leadership, community health, quality improvement. This is our way that we can help the district and students become future focused. The need in nursing, we continue to look at the future of school nursing and how we need to evolve. We want to strengthen the role of the nurses as case managers for our diabetics, and then look at case management of medically fragile and medically complex students. We're seeing an influx of medically complex students, and if you think about it, medical technology is saving our babies. And so now they're coming to school, but they have a lot more needs than your average student. So we want to look at that. We also developed the new orientation program, but we want to put it into use. And we want to make sure that we are quickly able to acclimate nurses into the school nurse role, because a nurse in a hospital and a school nurse are two totally different animals. So we want to make sure we're addressing their needs so that we have nurses that want to be here and that want to stay and want to grow as school nurses. And then we're initiating what we call a new program, Frequent Flyer or Fab 5 program. Each nurse has picked 5 students in their school that may have need a little bit of special attention. They may not have the skill set, the social skills. They may be maybe a loner or somebody that has been bullied, or somebody that's always in the office. And they've chosen 5 students, and they're going to spend a little extra time with those students throughout the year and really build a rapport and really connect to those students and make sure those students have somebody that they can connect with as well at the end of the year. And I'd like to end on some of our celebrations. First and most importantly, I guess, is our asthma and allergy regulation changes. A big thank you from the nurses, and a huge thank you that we are changing the snack program and keeping our children safe and healthy. Really appreciate it. The nurses not only did the Stop the Bleed program, but we all became train the trainers. So we took that knowledge, went back to all of our schools, trained our staff on Stop the Bleed, So in the, unfortunate event that we have a major catastrophe, everybody is prepared, I think, better prepared to address some of those issues. And we've spent the year, as you can tell by some of our PD days, learning a little bit more about the mental health needs and mental health disorders, and not just knowing them, but how they relate to the medical needs and the students that are coming into our office. Because we know that students from trauma or students that are depressed have truly significant medical needs. They do have stomach aches, they do have headaches, and we need to make sure we're addressing and treating the whole person. And lastly, I really want to just congratulate 3 of our stars. Christy Hillner from Barnwell received the Lifesaver Award at the beginning of last year for saving a person's life in her school building, a visitor. Jill Van Mater from John Weldon, and Angela Underwood Olson from Bryan Middle School both received Support Staff of the Year, and a special kudo to Angela because it was her first year in the district. So how about that, huh? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about the nurses, and thank you for all your support.
I looked at your slide and I totaled it up. That's over 178,000 visits last year.
And the one thing I forgot to put in there, and I really should have, is that over 90,000 of those students went back to class.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And they were able to finish out the day
Yes.
because of services that you provided.
Sure.
So here's to some unsung heroes in the district. Thank you so much. Mrs. Stiglich, did you have something to say? I saw you looking
I
like
guess I should have stayed out there for that.
I guess she should have stayed.
Of course I would. I'd like to congratulate Barb. I know that she came in and had some very big shoes to fill. So I really
modest,
appreciate.
aren't we?
Yeah, we are very modest. So I really appreciate the work she's done with the kiddos and with the program. That was one thing that was near and dear to my heart as a district employee, was the nursing program and how far we had come from when I had started. So I really appreciate, Barb, your hard work in keeping it going. And all those nurses deserve everything they get. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
All right. Board, any other questions or comments? Thank you for the presentation. Next on the agenda, under academic high target as well, we are going to hear from Dr. Hoven on our preliminary data.
Yes.
I didn't finish my sentence, I apologize. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about our preliminary APR data. So this includes some test score information as well as the other categories we end up being responsible for on our APR. Good news is, I'd like to point out, it is August and we are talking about not all of it, but most of it. So it's good progress, and I will update you on what we expect with the rest of it. So the first thing here, we've got a little chart of the timelines in front of us. September 24th, we're supposed to get our preliminary APR, so that would include our sort of final rating. October 8th is supposed to be the final release. One thing that we're being told, we have not quite seen it yet, is that APR is going to look different. They're saying they want to change the focus from our score to our needs to improve on and what we've done well. And so they're trying to present it in a different format, so we're not quite sure exactly what that's going to look like until we see it. This is really getting ahead of MSTEP 6. They're trying to kind of reset the tone for exactly what we should do with the information. So to give us 100 doesn't necessarily highlight what we did exactly well and what we need to work on. So we'll see what that looks like when it comes out. October 8th is, I think, a Tuesday. With the board meeting that week, we felt like having the final workshop ready for you would be rushed, and so we've put on there November for the workshop. I do have one other thing to point out when we get to it, but this is a chart you've seen for a couple of years. This is showing the conversion to the new standards. As of this year, we're in the fully orange column, so everything is being tested under the new standards. One thing you're going to see, English and math are normal at this point. Social studies was just field tested, so I won't report any social studies scores tonight. And science is doing what math and English did last year, which is new test, they're resetting cut scores, so we don't yet have our science information. So tonight will really just be a math and English update with science to come before the final APR. These next 4 graphs are just going to show you a visual of what we've done on our English and math, which is all we have at this point. On the left of every slide, the light blue is last year to the, well, 2 years ago, to the dark blue is this past year. On the right is the state. So we can compare pretty quickly to see in all these areas. This first slide is English. This is MAP scores from 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. The gold bars in the middle show the percentage increase or decrease from last year. So the smaller the bar, the closer it was to just level on the scores. A downward bar there, you can see the first one is a slight decrease. Versus you'll see on the next slide some bigger increases. But you can see scores are pretty level, some slight decreases overall, pretty flat from last year for 3rd through 5th grade. Moving on to the next slide, this is still English, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade MAP plus the English 2 EOC. You can see English, 6th grade slightly down, the other 3 a little over 1% up in those scores. And as you can see in the same span, the state actually had some decreases in some of those areas. So not only were we already above the state, we've increased that gap over the state in most of those areas. Moving into math, the first slide here is MAP 3rd through 6th. And you can see the first 2, we had a slight decrease. The next 2, 5th and 6th grade, a slight increase. Again, in all cases, scoring well above the state. And really, the increases and decreases aren't very significant. Just over 1% in some cases. Moving to the next one, 7th and 8th grade MAP plus the Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 EOCs. Lots to see here on 7th, 8th grade and Algebra 2. The biggest increases we had really in all of our areas. Still, you're not talking about 10% increases, right? So Algebra 2, we see an almost 4% increase, which is a really big increase in 1 year. You can see the state also had a big increase there. The one on this slide, you can see a decrease is our Algebra 1, almost 1.7% down, but at the same time, the state went down a little over 1.8%. So across the state, there was a decrease in Algebra 1. Our decrease was less than what the state realized on that. Moving into the other areas that we are looking at through APR, post-secondary placement. One of the third row here is really the one we spent a lot of our time looking at, which is our 2- and 4-year college placement. So you can see on this chart a 5-year high on percentage of our kids going on to 2- and 4-year colleges. Also like to highlight the very bottom row, only 1.4% unknown. So there's a lot of work from a lot of people to try to identify exactly what all of our kids are doing after they're out of our buildings. And so we can see increases there. In contrast with this, we also have a lot of conversations going on in our strategic plan about our kids who aren't going to college and what we're doing to better prepare them for what they are doing. So while that number on this slide might only be 17%, those are 17% of our kids that we believe we can do better things to serve their needs before they get out of our buildings. 4-year graduation rate, you can see a nice trend here, 94.8% a few years ago, up to just about 97% this year, which is an extremely high 4-year graduation rate, so happy to report that. AP courses, you're used to seeing AP courses just going up and up and up, and so in this case, we've again got a slight increase, 54.2 up to 54.6 of our graduates taking at least one AP course. The enrollment, so this slide's a little bit unique. This is the one slide that looks ahead a little bit. The last column here is actually enrollment for this current school year. So the second to last column reports last year's information. So you can see after an increase, this year we've actually seen a slight decrease in our AP enrollment. However, the individual students taking at least one AP course is level. It's the students taking more than that we've seen a decrease. And part of that is we've got a lot of students historically who've taken 3, 4, 5 AP courses, and you know the balance of taking rigorous coursework but also getting to be a teenager is sometimes something we have to work on with some of our students. This one is, as of last year, the students and exams taken. So you can see the orange bar is our number of exams. The shorter green bar is the total number of students who took exams. And you can see both of those are still continuing to trend higher. With lower enrollment this year, we'll see where that ends up at the end of the year, but this has been a long-standing trend for us. This next one actually shows the success of our students on the tests. And you can see that by and large, we've hovered right around 70% of our kids are passing at least one of their AP exams, and a little bit lower as far as our total percentage of exams with a passing score. And so in that case, you can see an all-time high on percentage of exams that are passed. So we continue to see not only more kids in AP courses, more kids taking exams, but more of them being successful. And that's a really difficult thing to do. Typically, as you increase your enrollment, you're challenging more students who had not been in that challenge before. So to see those success rates continue to climb higher is a fantastic thing. ACT data, this one actually only represents 2 of our 3 buildings. Howell Central was closed on the day of the ACT, and so we don't yet have their data included. It will be difficult to include it. Some students opted for a voucher to take it over the summer, where some will take it on a makeup date. But based on the 2 schools we have information for, you can see our composite slightly down from last year, English slightly down, math slightly up, reading's level, and science is slightly down. So as always, this is information that we get the more detailed information, and the buildings really start to break it down in all the different ways they can to find out where we might be able to make some movement. Reading, the next few slides are going to talk about reading, and this is one that at the end we'll talk a little bit more about what's next for this. So you can see out of all the slides we've talked about, the reading trend isn't going the way we want to see it on here. So you can see a decrease in our overall reading, students reading above grade level. You can see at the elementary level, so 3rd grade is the green bar, then 4th, then 5th, and you can see the overall trend is slightly down. One thing to highlight in the chart here, you can see that highlighted in red from 16-17 up to last year, you can see what each cohort did. So it's the cohort of kids moving from 3rd to 4th went up a little bit, then a little dip. Then the next year they went up again. So we try to pay attention to both things. What's our overall trend, and what are our individual groups of students doing as they move through? Middle school, you can look at this as well and see that this is a little closer to flat over these few years, but there is still a slight decrease. Again, the good news is you can see the cohorts are moving in the right direction as the kids move through, but we can also see as we move from the elementary to the middle, we do see a drop in scores moving from 5th to 6th grade, which to some extent is expected, but we certainly don't want to ignore that. We want to work on that as well. And I'll come back to that when we get to our strategies. Attendance rates, we had a lot to celebrate last year across all of our buildings. We saw positive movement in attendance. You can still see we're not quite back to where we were a few years ago, but we definitely had a good, strong year, and we'll talk a little bit more about strategies we're going to do here in a minute. This is another attendance slide. This just shows we're no longer just looking at overall numbers. This is us tracking individual students and saying, let's identify students in need of our attention. And 10 plus absences, once you're at 10, we still get credit. You're still 90-90, but we recognize that that's a lot of school for students to miss. So we really try to get them on our radar before they get up to that missing 10% of their days range. This is our discipline. You can see the nice trend in both ISS, which is the green bar, and OSS, which is the gold. And one thing to note here is that you can see both of them are on the decrease. It would be easy to decrease your OSS by just having more kids serve ISS, but you can see that's not the case here. We actually are seeing a decrease overall in both of them, so that's very positive as well. So when we get to the things that we really would highlight of our strengths, our academics, you saw some up and some down, so overall still very strong scores, but we didn't highlight them as a giant increase like we have in some of the other areas. Advanced placement is a strength. You continue to see the trends moving upward. Graduation was a great number for us. Behavior, again, that trend of both ISS and OSS going down. And attendance, certainly this past year was a strong year, and we're looking forward to more of that. Opportunities for improvement, reading. That was one that you certainly saw we need to give some attention to. College credit is one of our action steps through the strategic plan. AP is one avenue to college credit. We're working on exploring more ways for students to access college credit in ways that get more overall students involved besides just the AP approach. ACT is an opportunity for improvement. We see a trend over the years of a little bit up, a little bit down, and over time a little bit down, and in some cases relatively flat, but certainly some room to grow there. Behavior, while we see successes, we're not done. We want to continue improving what we do there, and same with attendance. One great year is not something to hang our hats on. We're going to continue to push for improvement. I know this is small on the slide, but looking at our strategies, first with reading, with our new FastBridge testing, we've been able to really dig deeper at what we believe the causes to be, and we believe we've identified phonics as what we need to put more focus on. So we're piloting this next year, some different approaches to returning the attention to explicit instruction on phonics, and we believe that will help us see those scores go back up. ELA workshop model at 7th and 8th grade, continuing to push for improving our volume reading and access to complex texts. MAP and EOC, the IBD reports, which we get to our, those really drilling down to the specific questions, the standards kids are doing well on, the standards they're struggling with. And heat maps, which is a way for our buildings at a glance to visually, think of a heat map where you see, bright red means one thing all the way over to green means something else, and really able to look standard by standard at what we're doing well and what we're not. And then handing those over to our individual PLCs to work with. Going on what I just mentioned, increasing our variety of college credit opportunities besides just AP, looking at all the different ways. Early college, which is one of them. We've got, I think, currently 12 students enrolled to begin early college this semester, and we'll give you an update on that once the dust settles and we see exactly where we are. Providing our schools the opportunity to participate in the Restorative Practices Academy through Ed+. We're seeing a lot of our behavior work is based around restorative practices. And then this last one, Work With All Here, that's a group out of Harvard that will help us with research-based strategies based around our specific attendance patterns in order to give us practical research-based strategies as opposed to long-standing things you just try because they feel like good ideas. So we're going to really try to focus our efforts on attendance and see where we can make an impact. And before I wrap up, I absolutely have to give a shout out to Zach Brady and David Brothers. They spent a lot of time digging through lots of reports, lots of numbers, and really putting together some good graphics and some good information for me to sit here and present to you tonight. So thank you very much to them. So any questions?
Mr. Lane?
I have 3 questions, kind of for myself and for the audience itself. Looking back at the grade 3 MAP scores, is 450 the highest we can get as a total? What's the...
So mathematically, 500 would be if all students scored advanced. If every student was advanced, what you kind of hear is practically 450 is somewhat considered a perfect score, and that would be roughly half of your kids proficient and half advanced. Typically, when you see numbers up above 400, you're talking about an average of being proficient. So I'm trying to get back to the specific slide here, but I don't know if Vicky's doing that or if I'm doing that, but it's working its way back. I just keep clicking and it's making progress, so. A couple more. So anyway, when we look at our numbers, of course, there's much more beneath those numbers than just what that final rating is.
Like there's one.
Yep, so I'm trying to get to English, 3rd grade English. So we were at 383.3 in 3rd grade English. So 400 would signify that on average our students are proficient. Obviously that's going to be made up of students who are below basic and basic all the way up through advanced. So anytime you see numbers over 400, those are really, really strong numbers. Anything approaching 400 is typically very strong. But we look deeper beyond that too to see what makes up those numbers.
Great, thank you. Secondly, on the graduation rate, what determines 97%?
So that's a 4-year graduation rate. We actually also track a 5 and a 6-year graduation rate. So that's our students who are completing and getting their diplomas in 4 years.
Only students that enter freshman year and graduate senior year, or?
I might have to refer to David to get that specific. Yes. He's nodding, so yes.
Yes. So if a child moves in here sophomore year, are they counted? And they finish? They are also counted.
Yes.
Okay, and I think all of us need to hear that. And then my final question was on the AP exams. I can't find the slide. Number of students. Anyway. Students that did not pass. I think what we don't understand is some of these that did not pass chose not to take the exam. It wasn't they did not pass, but just because a child takes an AP course does not mean that they have to take the exam for college credit.
Correct, but when we present the percentage of students passing an exam, so this slide here, those are students who took the exam. If they chose not to take it, now that doesn't mean they didn't pass the class and still didn't get credit for the class.
Correct, but they don't have to take the exam.
They don't have to
in
take
college,
it. Some students, for different reasons, choose not to take the exam, but this represents those who took the exam, the percentage who got a 3 or above.
Great, thank you.
Board, any other questions? I think there's a few questions because it's an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Very informative. All right, next on our agenda is our MSBA board report.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Missouri School Boards Association's board report for the month of August. We thank you for the opportunity to share some news and information during a few minutes of your board meeting. We begin with a look at the 2019 Safe Schools and Colleges Conference held last month in Springfield. One of the speakers at the event was Special Advisor to the Federal Commission on School Safety, Tom Wheeler. He said the report from that commission emphasized mental health support for students as a key to keeping our schools as safe and secure as possible.
I think what you'll see in the report is it discusses using Medicaid money to fund school counselors. All right, and the Secretary Azar was very clear that they're going to take steps to allow that. More so from funding, it was very clear that the integration of mental health services between providers, schools, law enforcement, the communication of that information is going to take place.
Another featured speaker at the conference was national school safety expert Susan Payne, the founder of the Safe to Tell Prevention Framework. She said the code of silence among students and adults is a major barrier to school leaders and law enforcement in efforts to prevent tragedies.
We know from a research perspective that through the code of silence, our communities can become very dangerous. If we don't get people to speak up about concerns that are happening in the community, we as law enforcement can't respond, we can't prevent, we can't intervene early, we can't solve cases. It's been an issue, it's not new, but it does impact us in schools today and with social media.
She also emphasized the importance of culture and climate in providing a safe learning environment for students. The Safe Schools and Colleges Conference is an annual event sponsored by the Missouri School Boards Association's Center for Education Safety, the only statewide school safety organization in Missouri. The event featured numerous concurrent sessions on school safety issues and brought together school leaders, law enforcement officials, mental health providers, and many others. As of August 1st, more than 90,000 children in Missouri have lost their health insurance coverage through MoHealthNet, Missouri's Medicaid program. In some cases, that happened because applications for the renewal of coverage were sent to the wrong addresses. Many families are not even aware their coverage has been terminated. Molly Ticknor is the executive director of the Show Me School-Based Health Alliance, and she says the situation matters a lot to schools.
So we do know that schools utilize Medicaid for a lot of different resources, specifically to provide healthcare services, potentially child well visits, as well as flu vaccinations or the vaccinations required to have your child enrolled in school, as well as we know that a lot of services that are provided specifically to our special ed children are Medicaid billable. So Medicaid revenue is really big for our school districts in order to help support our students.
She adds there are some things schools can do to help parents reinstate dropped coverage or to get initial coverage.
One is to review the school nurses are reviewing the lists of all their students that have chronic health conditions, because those are our kind of immediate kids that we know are going to be accessing healthcare services. So reviewing that list, looking online on the Department of Social Service website to see if the student has healthcare. That's something that anyone can do. I can go on that website and type in the child's name or their date of birth, and I can find out, do they have current coverage? And then I can help the families navigate getting their Medicaid back if they are dropped.
Ticknor adds it's critical that schools help make families aware of the issue of dropped Medicaid coverage as soon as possible. The Department of Social Services has staff available to attend back-to-school events, and to assist families in your school district. For more information on this Medicaid coverage crisis, you can also contact the Show Me School-Based Health Alliance at 800-807-8494. Governor Parson has signed into law House Bill 604, a bill containing numerous provisions related to K-12 education, including one that requires newly elected or appointed school board members who are trained after August 28th to receive 18.5 hours of training, an increase of 2.5 hours from the previous requirement. The additional time must focus on identifying signs of sexual abuse in children and the danger signals of potentially abusive relationships between children and adults. Beginning next month, the MSBA will provide the additional 2.5 hours in CBM essential training for new board members. In addition, all school board members must receive 1 hour of refresher training on an annual basis once the initial training is completed. That training will include concepts taught in the initial training, including the prevention of sexual abuse of children. MSBA will offer various opportunities to meet this requirement that will include online training, a classroom session in conjunction with the MSBA annual conference in September, and others throughout the year. Details will be provided in upcoming MSBA communications. By the way, registration is now open for the 2019 MSBA annual conference to be held September 26th through the 29th at the Lake of the Ozarks. Registration information is available on the MSBA website. Also, be sure your school board is represented at the MSBA Fall Delegate Assembly to be held on Friday, September 27th during the annual conference. This Delegate Assembly will be considering approval of MSBA's advocacy positions document that will form the basis of MSBA's lobbying efforts during the 2020 session of the Missouri General Assembly. Delegates do not have to be registered for the annual conference in order to participate in the Delegate Assembly, and if your board's designated delegate cannot attend, you can send another board member to represent your board at this important meeting. That's it for this month's edition of the MSBA Board Report. Thanks for allowing us to have some time at your board meeting. Have a great beginning to your school year, and so long from Columbia.
All right, board, next on our agenda is personnel. I would entertain a motion to approve the additional non-certified positions as presented.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Mrs. Simpkins, anything to add?
Nothing to add. We're excited to present this to the board to be able to offer the support to Fairmont and some of our students that need those interventions. I'm happy to have instructional paras that will be able to work with those individual students.
Excellent. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda under fiscal responsibility is our monthly financial report for June of 2019 preliminary. I would entertain a motion to approve the June 2019 preliminary financial statements as presented. I have a first and a second. Mr. Supple, anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Cope. A couple of things. First of all, the reason that we call them preliminary financial statements, for all intents and purposes, they're finalized, but during our annual financial audit, the auditors may find something that they want us to change, and so they might, the final June number might change. Placement of revenue or expense in a particular category might change, but they are, for all intents and purposes, finalized. Two other things that I wanted to point out. One is a very unique situation that presented itself this year. So as you know, we have taken transportation in-house, and that required the acquisition of a lot of buses. In order to get those delivered in time for school to start, we began that process during last fiscal year. And we have in place a lease arrangement for all of those buses. But we also need to report the information to DESE as part of the annual Secretary of the Board report. And so we needed to have a record within our financial software of the purchase of all of those buses. And so the mechanism was that we made the purchase order, we purchased all of the buses, we were reimbursed by the bank who's doing our leasing, and now we'll begin to make regular leasing payments for those buses. So we are paying for them over time, but the mechanism was to initially pay for them all up front. That way they're all recorded within our financial software, and then, as I said, we'll make the lease payments over time. What happened this year is that the timing of the reimbursements were off just a little bit. So we had the majority of the expense in last fiscal year, and all of the revenue will be in this fiscal year. So for accounting purposes, we needed to make a very large transfer to our capital projects fund. We are limited in the amount that we can transfer to the capital projects fund. There are various calculations. I don't need to go into the details. But DESE has a limit on what you can transfer. It varies school district to school district. But we transferred $7 million to the capital projects fund. In addition to that, in order to keep the capital projects fund in balance, meaning that we didn't spend more than our fund balance and the revenue that came in, I needed to move an additional $700,000 of revenue to the capital projects fund. So that $7.7 million shows up in various places within the financial statements for June. We received the reimbursements that are essentially equal to that $7.7 million on July 2nd. And so that money will be reimbursed to the general fund. So no harm, no foul. But for accounting purposes, June financial statements will look a little different than they have in prior years. And in this year's financial statements, as we have an opportunity to make that adjustment, we will be recording the revenue that we are placing back into the general fund into a prior period adjustment. So there is that revenue line contained within our financial statements. And so in the prior period adjustment, you'll see this very large number, which is just reimbursing the general fund for what we transferred to capital projects in order to keep the accounting straight. So that being as a prelude, I will say that if we didn't worry about the $700,000 of financial institution tax revenue that was moved to the capital projects fund, we would have ended last fiscal year with a positive balance of about $102,000. So we essentially had a balanced budget last year. Mr. Hain made a point earlier that oftentimes at the approval of the preliminary budget in June, the board is looking at a specific number that could be largely negative. You know, this year it was, we had some conversation about that. Last year's budget was about $5 million deficit at the time it was adopted. At the end of the fiscal year, we were essentially even. So I just wanted to share that. With the financial statements as you see them show a slight deficit of a little over $500,000, but that's really that movement of the financial institution tax revenue, which, as I said, is going to be reimbursed as we get those reimbursements from the bank. The other thing that I would address is that we have done a very good job, I believe, of keeping our tuition-based programs operating in a way that meets our goal of being positive or at best, you know, break even. And so we had another good year this year. Compliments to Susan Lane and all of the staff for those programs, for their diligence in creating a budget that works very well and being very mindful of their expenses. So that was a positive outcome for the year as well.
Thank you, Mr. Supple. Board, any questions? Mr. Hain.
Yeah, in reference to the facilities usage fund, I know the first year we ran and I'm looking at the numbers here, a $58,000 give or take deficit, and that was while we were setting up programs and buying software and different things like that, so it really wasn't functional, so we expected that. For this year, we incurred an additional $63 million or 63,000, make sure I can say that correctly, deficit for FY19, and you reference that a portion of that deficit is due to custodial costs that were not associated being charged to this program. Do we have an idea of, was that program still in the negative, or was it in the positive, or what? I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, so we've been doing this for a year and a half, and we have over, you know, $115,000, $120,000 worth of deficit.
Sure. We actually began the public use portion of the program August of last year, so it's just a year old. The first, as you indicated, the first half, that first 6 months, really was buying the software, hiring the staff member who's going to oversee that program, getting everything set up. So we have been into it for just a year. I have monthly meetings with Mr. Thomas Anderson, and I know that Mr. Gober meets with him on a weekly basis, and our focus has been on making sure that we are generating sufficient revenue to demonstrate to the board that we can meet our commitment to you that this is going to be a profitable venture for the school district. So I know that one of the strategies that we're going to employ this year is to provide some additional support using an existing staff member, so no additional expenditure, to help with some of the back-end paperwork type things so that Marvin can get out and really be a good salesman for the district and make contact with those organizations who are very anxious to use our facilities on a regular basis and who run tournaments and can generate some significant revenue. So to answer your question specifically, as of August 15th, 2019, no, the program is not generating revenue over expense. But we are working very hard so that when we get to June 30th of 2020, I hope to be able to present a very different picture to the board for that program. We did have, we experienced in the facility rental program the same frustrations that our activity directors experienced this spring, and that is a terrible number of rainouts. And so events were scheduled, rained out a second time, eventually canceled because it was impossible to reschedule. So that did have an impact. I don't want to make more of that than it is, but it certainly was a part of what led to the overall results for this year.
Okay, and then I got one other thing, because you said that it was my understanding we had one full-time employee, and then earlier this year we added an additional support person for that, and that was budgeted for that. Are you talking about an additional person in lieu of that, 2 part-time people, or 2? Is it a total of 3 people working on this now, or 2?
We had some conversation. We haven't actually added a staff position, but we have allowed Marvin to utilize on a temporary basis an administrative assistant who comes in and helps to deal with some of the paperwork. So we have spent a little bit of money for a substitute admin assistant to help Marvin out during some of the peak times, but he doesn't make use of that individual every day, and certainly not for 8 hours a day. So we haven't added a position or even half a position. We have provided additional support through the use of a substitute AA. What I'm talking about now is we have an existing staff member who has some familiarity with facilities and some knowledge and skill set relative to scheduling, who I think would be a great backup person to have a working understanding of the facility utilization software and can take care of some of the things that overwhelm us at times, which is like right at the beginning of the year when we open up the reservations, it's an onslaught, and then there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get back in touch with people, confirming reservations and so forth. And I think we can utilize existing staff, an existing staff member, so we're just giving them an additional assignment to help out. So we are charging to this program 1 full-time staff member, and that's Mr. Thomas Anderson. We are providing some support through a substitute AA and leveraging some existing staff members' time to also provide some support.
Okay, and just for further clarification, on page 16 of the financial thing, it shows facilities usage. It has a salaries and benefit number there. Is that salary and benefit number there, is that for one individual, or is that for one individual plus the custodial costs that are associated with that, or what exactly is it, because that's a rather large number?
Yes, that's all the custodial costs associated with that as well.
Custodial and the individual?
The manager, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Board, any other questions?
Can I just add something? We understand that the goal of the program was to generate revenue. That was the original focus of the program, and we will evaluate it this year to determine if we believe that it is a viable program moving forward. So it is something that we tried. We're working hard at making sure that it's successful, and we will evaluate it going into next budget.
Thank you. Board, any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, so the motion on the floor is to approve the June 2019 preliminary financial statements as presented. We have a first and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Sehal.
You're welcome.
Next on our agenda, still under fiscal responsibility, is the annual Secretary of the Board report. I would entertain a motion to approve the 2018-2019 annual Secretary of the Board report as presented.
So moved. Second.
I recorded Mrs. Walker as the first and Mrs. Lang as the second. Mr. Supple, anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Cope. I want to give a big shout out to a couple of individuals, Cindy Rahman primarily, but also Virginia Owens and Beverly Hood, both who work within the finance area. Getting the ASBR completed this year was a real challenge, and I'll tell you why. The new federal reporting requirements require that we show all of our revenue and expenses and break it out by building. And so we have 23 sites, and you might imagine that's quite a challenge. We have added, Francis Howell has added a little over 2,000 new accounting codes just to have places to put the revenue and expense related to the buildings that previously never had to be broken out by building. This year, in preparation for the ASBR, we had to complete 216 journal entries that affected 12,000 accounts. It has been a mind-numbing task that's taken months and months and months. And as you look at the report, as I look at the report, the final report as shown, you can't tell any difference between last year and this year in terms of this report, but the amount of work necessary for us to be able to submit the data was substantial. And we have really been working on this project for a year and a half. We began our preparation before this fiscal year ever started, last fiscal year ever started, because we had to have the accounting codes in place. And we, it was like a, like one of those tasks you hate. It's like every time you get something done, you find the next thing that, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. So for instance, for every account that we had to add to our general ledger, we had to add all those same accounts to the bank P-card software so that it all could be accounted for there because of the transactions that we do through the P-card. So just a shout out to Glenda Music, Sandy Sanford, just a lot of people in the finance department have spent a tremendous amount of time complying with the new ESSA reporting requirements, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to personally thank them so that the board could hear that and know the work that went into getting this ready. We've had a lot of fun in a sarcastic kind of way getting here, and I will say this, we are all very pleased to present the ASBR to you tonight.
Mr. Supple, I have a couple questions about it. Do we have any idea, and I may be asking you to look into the crystal ball, do we have any idea what drove the change in the reporting requirements?
Sure. The federal government would like to make sure that schools that are high poverty schools, so high or with high free and reduced lunch or low SES, however you would like to think of that, aren't being disproportionately funded relative to other schools. So this way you could conceptually look at how much do we spend at Central Elementary, I'll pick that school because it's right across the street, how much do we spend at Central Elementary and how much do we spend at Daniel Boone. So the concept is that if I know that I have a high free and reduced lunch school, then how are the dollars being spent so that those students at the high free and reduced lunch school are receiving the same level of instructional support as perhaps a school with a very low free and reduced lunch percentage. So I think that's the genesis of that, but as is often the case, there wasn't a lot of thought given to what would be required to effectuate that change across the nation. So we never had to break out our revenue by school or our expenses by school. So you can think of things that, like electricity, we now have to allocate the cost of electricity, which we always, we get individual bills, but we only recorded it in the general ledger as a single line. Now that's 23 or 26 lines because we have to break it out for every site. And then you multiply that across the hundreds of transactions that we do all the time.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is, after this initial setup, since it was so tedious and time consuming, will it be easier going forward now that the framework is set up, or will it still be a challenge?
It's our fervent hope that we have solved all the problems.
Okay, thank you. Board, any other questions? Okay. So the motion on the floor is to approve the 2018-2019 Annual Secretary of the Board Report as presented. We have a first and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Supple. Next on our agenda is performance contracting firms. I would entertain a motion to approve the letters of intent with Ameresco, thank you, and GRP Mechanical Contractors as presented.
So moved. Second.
I recorded Mr. Haynes for the first and Mrs. Walker for the second. Mr. Supple, anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Coe. One of the strategies that we have been exploring as part of Goal 5 and the work of the Facilities Committee is how we can best leverage resources available to us to complete the substantial amount of work that we know needs to be done in our buildings based on the Comprehensive Facilities Master Plan that the board recently received and approved. One of those strategies would be to find ways that we can create greater efficiency within the operation of our buildings, perhaps by replacing fluorescents with LEDs, and the associated energy savings would pay for the cost of making that changeover. That is, in a nutshell, one of the ways that a performance contracting company can assist school districts in getting through some of the capital project work that needs to be done. We know we have a lot of HVAC work that needs to be completed. There can be operational savings as a result of getting a more efficient boiler or a more efficient HVAC system. Those operational savings can be used to offset the cost of installing the air handlers or whatever else might be necessary to complete that. So this motion tonight gives me the ability to begin to sit down with these two firms. We've already, as I detailed in the memo. We've been through a fairly extensive RFQ process, taking a look at who might be a best fit with the district. And now we can begin to define a very specific scope of work. And this is, of course, tied very closely to a conversation we'll have later this evening about the bond issue. So once we determine the specific scope of work, we can begin to parse out what might be a good fit for performance contracting and how that might extend the dollars that we have available to us through any bond issue in order to complete some additional work. So the letters of intent indicate that we want to begin to enter into contract with these two firms. And again, after we get more clear direction from the board about the exact scope of work that you'd like to see us undertake, we can begin to develop a detailed contract with each of these two firms to address specific projects.
Thank you, Mr. Supple. Board, any questions? Mr. Hain?
Yeah, I guess the one question I have is, were these two finalists, or the two that we're proposing to go out for RFQs for, were they chosen because they offer a different service sector, like one's more with lighting, one's more with HVAC, or are we selecting two companies because of the size and the enormity of the district?
We're selecting two companies because of the size and enormity of the district. I would imagine that whatever scope, both firms are capable of handling the full gamut of whatever might fall under the purview of performance contracting. So we're very confident that they can complete any scope of work that we determine. My thought process would be two firms, if you think about it, working at the north and the south end of the district and coming towards the center, and you divide that up between two firms, you might make that work proceed a little bit more quickly than if one firm was trying to address something at 23 different sites.
Board, any other questions or discussion? The motion on the floor is to approve the letters of intent with
Amoresco.
Amoresco, thank you. And group mechanical contractors as presented. We have a first and a second. All of those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Supple. Next is purchases over $7,500. I would entertain a motion to approve the purchases over $7,500 as presented.
So moved.
Second. I recorded Mrs. Walker with the first and Mrs. Lang as the second. Mr. Supple, anything to add to the report?
No, thank you.
Board, any questions or comments? All of those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. In our agenda, we're now moving to strategic planning. And board, for information purposes, we have an offer by MSBA regarding professional development. Dr. Mary Hendricks Harris, do you have anything to add to this?
No, you might remember that we had a board meeting over at Helmbeck because we allowed MSBA to host an event here in our boardroom that evening. And they have offered us a professional development opportunity. And you can see on page 2 of the attached, the options that are available to the board there. I'd recommend positive board and superintendent relations. One of the things that I will say is that I know also at retreat we had a conversation about the board completing a self-assessment. That is something that there was a desire on the board's part to do, as well as something that we anticipate will be part of MSIP 6. I've talked with Dusty some, and they believe that as part of MSIP 6, the self-evaluation that MSBA uses will be the one that eventually boards will have to use. That might be one consideration.
And would you like us to make a choice this evening, in, out, all of the above, have a conversation?
I don't have a preference.
Okay. So I agree, we did talk at retreat about the board self-evaluation. I know we had a couple board members volunteer to kind of work on that for us. Is this an area that we think we can use some assistance in?
Yep, definitely.
Is there anyone concerned about taking that opportunity?
I will just say, just to refresh the board memory, that we did bring the MSBA board self-evaluation to retreat. It was not something that you thought would 100% meet your needs. However, we know now that MSIP 6 is going to be headed in that direction, so might be something that we have to consider. And the other thing is you could have the professional development and choose not to use the exact tool, but incorporate some of the ideas from the training into the tool that you choose.
Agree. So let's move forward with setting up that opportunity.
Is there a month of preference for the Board of Education?
Her comment was she was retired. It doesn't matter to her. We'll discuss amongst ourselves, and
We'll put something in the board update regarding preferences.
That would be excellent. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, still under strategic planning, is taking a look at our planning committee proposal. Dr. Hendricks-Harris.
Yes, I'll go through this fairly quickly. At the retreat, we also discussed some different structures for strategic plan committees. We did a survey at the end. Oh, I'm turning mine on my computer, but not on your screen. This is not the appropriate PowerPoint. I was trying to make it match what I wanted to say, but it wasn't working. I can, you have it available though. So just to give you a little background, we did do a survey of our advisory committees. That was the one that we had some conversation about. And overall, the surveys were very positive. We did not have a good turnout for the surveys, however. So we had 31 advisory members complete surveys. 84% thought that it was a good use of their time, and 90% reported they were clear about purpose and outcomes. Our biggest number of people who strongly disagreed and agreed, or disagreed and strongly disagreed, was those who didn't feel that the time was appropriate. Of those, I think one felt that it was too long, and the rest felt that it was too short, that they wanted more time on those advisory committees. So we did last year attempt the advisory committee in each goal area. We really thought focusing on initial direction for each of those goal committees would be helpful. And now as we reevaluate our work after year one, I'm suggesting a change in structure. So I think we need to look at some interconnectedness of the goal areas, as well as ensure that we have opportunities, which is difficult in just one goal area, for true input. So I think if we start to look at an oversight committee, looking at all five goals, how they're connected, we'll have more opportunities for authentic input as well. So, the other thing we talked about at retreat, just as a reminder, is these meetings would take the place of our monthly updates. In 1819, you can see there we had advisory and standing and then action teams. Moving forward, we would have our standing committees report to the steering and then the action teams reporting to standing. This shows who would be involved. This is an initial draft and proposal. What I did was take the initial draft from Strategic Planning Core Committee, who met on several occasions in order to develop our strategic plan, and just adapted it. So we did not have 7 Board of Education members on that core committee. Moving forward, we would want you to be involved. We did not have goal champions at the time. We didn't have goal areas, so we didn't have goal champions. That has been adjusted, and the other numbers have pretty much stayed the same. I think that we would be very excited to, once again, get student representation involved in strategic planning conversations. We have asked you to hold these dates in hopes that we would be moving forward with this proposal. And something that had been discussed is that the Brownies with the board would be held prior to the steering committee meetings. So any thoughts, input, things you'd like to see different?
So just to clarify, the concept is the committee meeting would follow our Brownies with the board. So kind of a reception atmosphere and then move into the updates. Okay. Board, any questions, discussion? Okay with the transition? Some dialogue? We discussed a lot of this at the retreat.
Yes, exactly.
I do have one question.
You say 31 people responded to the survey? How many did we send out?
I don't
Is
know
it
the
to
number off the
everyone
top of my head. I'm going to say
to all of
100. But I'll give you an update in the board update with an exact number.
Right, I myself am happy with the change in direction, kind of honing back in. Now that we've been working with it for a year, you know, like any process improvement, you reevaluate, and I think this is a good direction. Okay, thank you very much. All right, board, let's take a 5-minute break and then we will move down for our working session. This evening, we will be talking about our tax rate and facilities. So we will reconvene in 5 minutes.
Oh, he looked at me too. And while you're standing
At least not fingers.
So you're
Oh, no.
I know. I was going to say it, but I thought I
That's my fear, but I can't tell.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I just haven't said
Yeah, I'm sure you probably have. It's like,
Yeah, no, it's been a very time.
It's interesting, very interesting, and I don't always get to go because it's usually the school nurse association is their meetings with this, so I go there because I was in baseball. But so it's good to hear this,
You're back there. He's giving me moral support.
Thank you, sir.
Come and talk about facilities.
Yeah.
Are you so excited?
It's a fun topic. You know, as Mary described it, it's concrete. You can actually see each side. Sometimes it's nice.
Very logically.
Whatever I can do to help. That's what I'm here for.
Did I tell you when I was bus monitor that little image that I stink?
Did you what?
Stink.
Oh.
I was like, hey, I'm not going to the whole time he's doing it. Verbally defiant, but doing everything he says to me. You know, you stink.
What building? Oh, I know him. Yes, now I do.
So sorry, I even took a shower this morning and hoped that I would be good and sneaky clean. Like, I had so much fun. So much fun. He was fantastic. And then he's eating and bus drivers. Bus, there's no snacks because there are other children here that are allergic to food. You can't eat the rest of this. This is cheese. Nobody's allergic to cheese. And she's like, yes, there are kids that have dairy allergies. He's like, and the whole thing's like, he's putting it, like, he's so doing what she says. He's putting it away. Well, I'm not putting it away, and I'm gonna eat it. The whole time he's putting it away. And it was so interesting because completely defiant, but doing everything you asked him to do.
Second career, maybe you should be eating. Go down to Heritage for a few days.
I was there all days.
Yeah. Yeah, they are really talented.
There's having more meetings are hurting me think more.
Absolutely. We met with her on Monday, had a great conversation.
I haven't heard anything.
We're gonna adjust the policy. I want to bring that hit to 26.
I know, I'm gonna regret this later. Fantastic.
You know,
The other one that you like
may not be exactly when you want to do
Roly
it.
cake? Yeah, it's gone.
Are we ready to reconvene?
No, Leslie, that's where I got this from. The lady.
You brought one piece
Or a lot.
didn't even bring anyone else on this.
It's back there.
My pen from here to there.
Is this it?
Yes, that is gone.
All right, if we can begin our work session.
That would be fun. You gonna join us?
Yeah, I'm grabbing my computer.
Oh, okay.
Did you sit at the dais and look down?
What's new? That little power thing must look down on us. Okay.
All right, the first part of our work session is to discuss our 2019-2020 tax rate. I assume, Mr. Supple, you would have the floor?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Just a little bit of information to share. This is a reassessment year. Typically at this time of the year, I have the Board of Equalization totals from the assessor, but I contacted them earlier this week. They're working very hard on getting those done, and they hope to have them by the end of this week. I checked just earlier this evening. They're not posted yet, but we'll use they shouldn't contribute a significant difference from where we are, but at least to set the framework on, we're using numbers from July. So the first thing I'm sharing with you is just that the state auditor provided us with a revision of our tax rate ceiling for last year. So each year they take a look at our data, our specific data, particularly the state assessed utilities revenue, and they calculate what our tax rate ceiling would have been had we known exactly what that state assessed utilities revenue would be. So it was adjusted from $4.1862 to $4.19.26. So it's not a big difference, but it does reset the calculation for us. So that's just the first thing that I wanted to share. Vicki, next slide, please. This just shows the history of our assessed valuation. So in April, when I shared with the board the projected tax rate based on for the projected tax liability notice, at that time we had a total of $2,876,000,000 in assessed valuation. And so in comparing that, the April data, to the December 31 data. There are several calculation points during the year. December 31 is one of them. So that was about a 10.23% increase. When we got our assessed valuation data in July, some minor changes. You can see that real estate is real property is down just under 1%. Personal property is also down just a bit. Locally assessed, there were some positive changes there, but overall, in the big scheme of things, they don't contribute a huge amount to our overall assessed valuation. And the new construction number went down just a bit as well. And so as of July 1, our total assessed valuation was $2,852,000,000. So just down just a little bit. And again, that just informs why there's going to be some differences as we move forward. This is just a form that the state auditor provides us for calculating our tax rate. We start with that new tax rate ceiling that I had shared with you just moments ago. And then behind all of this is a series of calculations that help us arrive at what our tax rate would be for this year. And based on all those calculations, the tax rate for our operating funds is shown to be $3.98, just a little bit over that. And so if we look at our current rate, or for this discussion purposes, the column is titled Workshop, and compare that to where we were in April with the projected tax liability notice, we were showing that our operating rate was going to go down a little over 24 cents. And so we would move from $4.1862 to $3.94.17. We're actually now, based on both the changes in the tax rate ceiling and the reductions in that slight reduction in total assessed valuation, we're now projecting that our operating levy would be $3.9843. Our debt levy is projected to remain exactly the same. And so our overall rate is going down, projected to go down just slightly more than 20 cents, which is about a 4% reduction in our overall tax rate. Just important, I know I've shared it with the board on a number of occasions, but as we looked at that previous slide with our change in assessed valuation, the important thing to take away from this, of course, is that 10.3% growth in assessed value is great, but our revenue is restricted to 1.9%. That's the amount of CPI that the state auditor has calculated, and so that's how our revenue will change. So we'd like to see that assessed valuation number go up. It does help, particularly when the new construction number increases, but our overall revenue calculation is really governed by the amount of change in consumer price index. So we will have a formal workshop or a formal hearing with the board at our September meeting. And I will, of course, by then have the after Board of Equalization assessed valuation numbers. So the rate that I present to you that evening may look a little different than what I'm showing you at the workshop tonight, but probably, knock on wood, not significantly different. If anything, I would hope that there would be perhaps a slight uptick from the July number, which would play out in terms of a little bit lower rate overall. But we are going to see a reduction. The bottom line is we're going to see a reduction in our tax rate just as a result of the reassessment process. So we are able to capture some revenue on existing property, and of course we get revenue for new construction, but we have to roll our rate back so that it keeps the level of revenue growth within the constitutionally required amount.
Thank you, Mr. Supple. Board, do you have any questions?
I have a comment. So it sounds like people's taxes are going to go down. But I think it's important that people understand that's not what's going to happen. The tax rate's going down because the assessed value has gone up, correct?
That's
so
correct.
Most people should see their taxes stay about the same for the school district year over year,
That's
roughly.
The Rita and Roy, I would love for Rita and Roy to be able to say yes. It gets more complicated, and I do feel an obligation to not overly complicate it, but a little bit. So, to the extent that your assessed valuation changed, the valuation of your home changed, in close relationship to the overall change for the district, your taxes would be exactly the same. So if our tax rate went up 10%, if our assessed valuation went up 10% and your home went up 10%, your bill would be exactly the same. It would be 1.9% higher. If our assessed valuation increased 10% and the value of your home went up 25%, you're going to see a big increase in your tax rate to pay to the school district. If AV went up 10% and yours went up 7% or declined a little bit, those things do happen, your taxes would be less. The net effect to the district is that we see a 1.9% growth in revenue on existing construction. But that treats different taxpayers very differently across the district because not everybody is right at the average. People are above and below that, and to the extent you're above and below that, your actual tax bill is impacted.
I think that explained it pretty well, but without overcomplicating it too much, to say taxes aren't really going down.
Is the right motion. Thank you. Board, any other questions, comments? So this will be brought to vote at our next board meeting?
Yeah, so we'll have the hearing first, and then later in the meeting, approval of the tax rate.
Great, thank you, Mr. Supple. Okay, next on our agenda for our work session is facilities. Dr. Vanderpool.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to use the clicker. Okay. Thank you. To be here tonight to talk through the planning that we did over the summer. And so I'm going to go through the first 3/4 of these slides as quickly as possible so we can get to the meat and potatoes, which is really talking about the projects and the money. So we had a committee that met, an expanded facilities committee. So the facilities group has met every year forever. And there's been some community members, principals, district level administrators, and facilities managers on that group. We enhanced that, added to that group this time with a couple other people, specifically building principals that would be affected by any future changes. Made sure we had FHEA and FISPA representation at the meetings, and we met. Mr. Gober and I facilitated, and then we met in May, June, and July to talk about different projects across the district using the blueprint from the architects that was and the work that they did last year, and then the work that our facilities managers have about the district and their needs. So we wanted to focus in on big projects that may be used for future bond. And at the start, we thought that we'd be looking at projects over several phases, and then we realized with our short time frame, we really needed to focus on that phase 1, priority 1 group. And then the first meeting, we decided to measure, assess each project based on 3 things: equity. And when we say equity, we're comparing school buildings, elementary to elementary, making sure that they have the same type of environmental spaces, structural spaces, the same type of classroom, gyms, as each other, safety, and then life cycle replacement. And then at the end, we work towards consensus, looking at each project and making sure that the committee could support. The life cycle replacement, which was one of our bigger areas, because this is just the basics. You've got to have your HVAC systems working, your plumbing has to be on most of the time. We know we have problems here and there, so electrical, parking lots, athletic fields, and playgrounds. We talked through the different needs across the district, and again, we use both the managers that know the district well, and then the architects to help us determine what needs to be completed in the next 5 years. As we get into this, we'll have kind of 2 sort of life cycle replacement projects. In some instances, like the work we may have that may need to be done at a Warren Elementary School. Warren may only need HVAC upgrades to their building because they're reaching that life cycle for that area. And that's all we're going to do there. So when we get to the numbers and talk at the end, you'll see just Warren and really looking at that. Some of the other projects like Becky David, which was built in the 60s, has a lot of other needs, and so the life cycle projects get embedded in a larger building upgrade. We also, with the group, had a conversation about performance contracting. That at least one of those groups, I think it was Amoresco, had spoken to the facilities group in the past, giving us an idea of what it could do. We just wanted to be able to provide the facilities group an idea of how much work might we be able to get done and through cost savings. And they made it clear that we would need to have some studies done to get an accurate number, but it would help to cover some of the life cycle replacement projects that we'd identified. Safety, the things that really kind of rose to the surface were controlled access at all our buildings. So right now, our 3 high schools and Daniel Boone Elementary, you can get in through the door, one set of doors, but the next set's locked until you go through the office or you check in with one of the AAs. So we really see that as something that needs to be done at every one of our buildings. And so that was a priority area that was identified. And then also adding security film to all the windows. So this is our first big project, which is Henderson Elementary. We were able to tour this building at our last meeting. We looked at, there's just a lot of issues with Henderson. You can tell with several of our buildings in the district, some of the decisions that may have been made in the past weren't really focused on what the students may need long term. They may have been Band-Aids for what was happening at the time, but if you've ever been to Henderson and you've been back in the area where their gym is, or their cafeteria, or their cafeteria-asium, which is a curtain that separates the cafeteria from a gym, and the students have to eat while they're They're also having PE classes, and then on the stage we have 50 students participating in music right now. And so even we know that Henderson is packed. It's over capacity by about 80 students. Even if we remove those 80 students, we would still have these exact same issues. There would still be music class taught on the stage. There would still be a PE class happening while they're trying to eat lunch. So that issue is going to exist no matter what. It is not equitable or safe. And so when we look at the projects, along with some upgrades that need to be done to Henderson, there is a plan to have a new addition with 8 classrooms, which, while the details of those 8 classrooms haven't been worked out, a good example, Henderson has one dedicated art classroom that was originally designed for the building that hasn't been used as an art classroom for about 15 years. It's been used as a 5th grade classroom or 3rd grade classroom. So having dedicated space for some of those fine arts areas would probably be the first priority. And then looking at storage and some other things, because right now I think they only have 1 or 2 closets in the building. They're using their closets as space for adults and kids. And with Henderson, and something that we're trying to do with all these upgrades is, as we look at a building, we're not going to just put that addition on the end. We also want to make sure that a building that was constructed about 35 years ago has building-wide updates. So when we say updates, we're thinking paint, ceiling, lighting, flooring. When we're in there, it just makes sense to get it all done at the same time. And then we don't have to worry about Henderson for the next phase. We can move on to other big projects. And then in general, we have 4 buildings. The newest is Barnwell, built in '81. Fairmont was '79, Becky David '62, and Hollenbeck '72. The buildings have had different additions over the years, but none of them have had a complete update. And like we talked about at Henderson, an update, flooring, paint, lighting, ceiling, and some minor renovations just to help clean up some spaces. I believe at least both the elementary schools have had new library media centers added in the past few years, but their old library media center was just kind of left vacant without a real plan in place. So making sure those are designed better for kids, and then the life cycle replacement updates that would need to be done at those buildings. Francis Howell High School auditorium. This auditorium, along with the one at North, has been on the Facilities Committee's list for about a dozen years. It has limited seating, it needs significant updates. They're not able to get replacement parts for things like the chairs and different components in the building. It isn't an old space. I believe it was built in the 90s. 94. So it's not that it just, again, it was, you're going to have 2,000 students in the building, you should be able to at least have a class meeting in your auditorium, and it has under 300 seats available. So it was never really, it never was designed the way it should have been. And when we look at equity across the district, we really would like those auditoriums to be able to hold a class. It's also part of the original master plan when the new Howell was constructed, was to look at that auditorium. Building C. This is kind of a forgotten area in the district. It is the first building you see when you go down to Francis Howell High School's campus. It is a very large structure, and I think that's what makes this building a little unique. The amount of square footage in that building and the amount of money to just provide some basic updates. So the HVAC needs to be completely replaced. The building envelope is having some pretty significant issues, windows, gaps in the brick, the doors. A lot of critters get into that building. There's been some mold issues in different places in the building. There's just a lot of renovations, and right now that building on the upper level is used for professional development for staff in about 4 classrooms, and then Francis Howell Union. And then on the lower level, it has some office space for our curriculum and assessment department, and then for special education. We have about 24 people housed there, and then storage. But because of its size, the cost of renovations would be around $10 million, and we could build a brand new Union High School for about 6 or 6.5, according to the architects. So, the proposal would be to look at either building new sites or purchasing other structures that would fit those needs. But the building is in significant disrepair. It needs to be probably torn down. Francis Howell North. This is the one we'll probably have the most discussion about tonight, because this is the one that I think, as both a facilities committee and just having conversations with folks within the district, that people are really torn on. It was built in 6 phases, and each phase has caused issue with safety. So having line of sight for supervision, you walk into the high schools, most of them have long corridors, makes it easy to supervise. Francis Howell North's much more choppy. The space isn't ideal because of that, and we've had issues over the years with the roof, different roofs connecting, different types of roof, different slopes, and so there's just a lot going on at Francis Howell North, and it isn't the same as our 2 high schools that we have right now. It isn't in the same place. So we looked at 3 different options for this building. 2 of those were to renovate, and 1 is to rebuild. The committee had the architects came in. The report that they created for us last year had some big ideas and numbers in it, but it didn't really drill down what they could do with the building. So the architects took some time to do a walkthrough, come back with a better idea about some of the things that they could do to the building, cafeteria space, office space, rearranging where the classrooms are within the building. We'll talk through a few of those, but we definitely had a clear vision of what we could do in a renovation versus a complete rebuild. And so the Francis Howell North option A, and you all should have this packet here too that breaks down the numbers for each one of the buildings. And so while we go through this, I'll kind of highlight North. Big idea though with both option A and B, the flooring, paint, ceiling, lighting, HVAC issues, electrical upgrades, plumbing. The roof would be repaired, and then the building envelope. So we're taking care of all the main components within the building, bringing it back up to par with many of our other sites. It's still going to be Francis Howell North, but it would definitely have it be in a much better place. The auditorium construction, a new auditorium, replace the gym bleachers, and then greenhouse renovation. In the estimates, it's at about $47 million for this option, but know that we use the numbers from the architects, and a couple of those numbers, like they have a $4 million as a placeholder for STEM or PLTW. That isn't something that we identified as a specific project that needs to be completed, but that part of that $47 million, and so that when we look at when we take some of those extras out or things that we hadn't planned on doing, we're closer to 42 or 43 for this renovation. Option B. So it gives us the basics from A. All the updates that we would get, including restroom renovations across the building, science room renovations, which would allow the building to be departmentalized. So right now, if you walk in, you've got English, math, science, maybe all in the same hall. This would allow us we have new science wing that was built about 9 years ago. It would allow us to use that, and then the classrooms surrounding that new wing would be turned into all new science classrooms, allowing then that would be a science area, and then across the building we would be able to departmentalize. So you'd have a math wing, an ELA wing, a fine arts wing, and you'd be able to do that across the building. The addition of a softball field, library renovations, cafeteria and kitchen renovations, teacher workroom, office reconfiguration, and then the potential for a new storage building. That came up as a consistent concern that they didn't have the storage in that building that they needed. We asked that they look at the courtyards. There are 4 courtyards in Francis Howell North, so when you walk in, you'll see those enclosed spaces. About enclosing those, the architects came back and presented that as an option, and that is in the numbers that we've got in this document, but after having some conversation with the architects, we found that there's also going to be a lot of challenges because you're going to have one more roof connecting to others, and they're all going down into that area, so that may not be the best, but we wanted to make sure that we had all the options to present to the group. I also want to say with the roof, the issue over the past few years has been leaks coming in and the rain. We looked back over the past year at the number of work orders we've had at the different high schools. We had 15 work orders put in for some type of a leak at North. Central had 12, and Francis Howell High had 8. So this proposal, really option A and B, would include $4 million of work to that roof, which may be more than we actually need to do because some of that has been replaced. But we would anticipate being able to get that roof to at least the same place as everyone else, if not better, with that amount of work. And then option C, I really wanted to put more here, but Kevin and Mary said this said enough. New building. And the idea would be on the back side of the campus, behind the football fields, there is enough of a footprint to put a structure similar to the current Francis Howell High School. So looking at that building and just moving it. It may require us to rebuild the football stadium. The architects are unsure, but it is right there. I mean, it's close. So the costs there include that, and I think that was in the about 85 million, 86 million for the new building. And we of course have both unknowns in both options. The renovation numbers that we presented actually have some, I think they've got some more unknowns already figured in, some overtime costs and things like that. But we would anticipate 10 to 15% in additional costs for both. The architects have advised us that the new building, because of the amount of site work that would have to be done, those costs would be about double. So it would be on the higher end for the new building versus the renovations on the old. So they said maybe more around 5% for the renovations, whereas you'd be in the 10% plus range for the new building. The soil work that would have to be done, you wouldn't need to do in a renovation. All the works with the architects and the drawings with the new building are just going to be considerably more than the renovations. So something that wanted to kind of bring up, the committee on our last meeting, we went through all the projects and we used a consensus process. Just try to keep it simple. 1, 2, 3. 3, you 100% the project, don't see any flaws or any concerns. 2, there's a few concerns, but you still support it. And 1, there's a barrier there to you giving the project your support. And so we went around with our tables and we talked and kind of worked through that. And so there's some considerations. All the projects are 2 or a 3. But in some case, Henderson Elementary, no one had any concerns. After walking the building and seeing what the kids are experiencing every day, seeing that their one dedicated gym is about the size of a multi-purpose room at most of our buildings, it was easy to determine that they needed to have that addition and the upgrades. So, but some of the other projects, there was some things for us to think about. So we included those. Life cycle replacement. There's some concern that the estimates that we have from both our architects and our managers may be low, and that as we get into these projects, we may have some hidden surprises that we have to deal with. And then there was some areas that may be less of a priority than others, and really the group talked about athletic fields. So there was some question about would those be a top priority compared to some of the other needs. We identified about $3.5 million in upgrades across the district. Some of those, just so that you know, really are an equity and safety issue. So our 4 middle schools that have a track, that track hasn't been replaced, and they're in bad condition, so those need to be taken care of, and those are about $400,000 for the 4 buildings. The bleachers at Francis Howell High School, there's some structural concerns with those bleachers, and that's about a $500,000 project. The fields at our elementary schools, those aren't maintained at the same level as the athletic fields at our high schools that are playing soccer, but kids are still running and playing, and so making sure that those are in good condition. So they may not be the same priority, but there's definitely some safety concerns with those different projects. And then Francis Howell High School's auditorium. There was some thought, could we consider remodel or addition? I think the architects would tell us that really isn't feasible. It wouldn't make a lot of sense, just the way an auditorium is constructed. It's a big expense, it's $9.6 million. The expectation now, according to the architects, is a structure that's designed to hold that many people needs to be able to be a shelter, so a tornado type of shelter, which has some added costs. And then they thought that maybe this could be part of our second phase of projects, because while we've got a lot of projects that are needing to be completed, maybe this can wait for a few years. And then just some considerations that came up about North, displacing students and staff. The architects at our meeting talked about it could be a 4 to 5 year window for construction with the renovations. Now, after having some further conversations with them, looking at some different options that we could use to make sure that certain parts of the building are cleared out during the renovations, I think that they're down to about a 2-year time frame, but it's a mess when you're trying to do renovations in the middle of the school year. So there was a lot of concerns there. Unknown issues, you just start digging into a building and you don't know what's behind the wall. It won't solve the supervision issues, so we're not going to necessarily now have a big long corridor where we can supervise. Those twists and turns in the building will still exist. And then just moving from one department to another, there was concern about, now that we've got math all in one area, if I'm going from math to science, is that so spread out that we may see some issues with kids getting back and forth? And then the New North, the cost, it's a significant, request. Community support around a New North, and then the displacing after-school events. So, and that happened at Howell when that was being constructed. And these are just some other things that popped up, talking about our transportation facilities. We've done a lot this past year to clean up what we had, but it's definitely not at the place it needs to be for the staff and the buses. So the old Heritage Building, there's some needs there, but it's not a big project. And then the phase 2 needs, so looking at life cycle replacement items there, small John Weldon addition, and then some building updates to places like John Weldon or Harvest Ridge. And so these are the 3 options.
You can turn it over to Kevin if you want.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. So we tried to, we shared a lot of information with the board tonight. We wanted to try to give you some way to frame how we might be able to approach this. We know that our overriding goal here is to not increase our debt service levy. And so what are the options that we can do in order to make that a reality? We could issue $120 million of bonds in April of 2020. That would give us enough to do that option 1 at Francis Howell North at Refresh. We would not be able to do the auditorium at Francis Howell High School, but then we could do all of the other phase 1 projects. So you have that spreadsheet list Dr. Vanderpool referred to. We can do all of the projects that are listed there with the exception of the auditorium at Howell and do that refresh at North. And then we would consider that we would do some type of a phase 2. I put here for discussion purposes 6 years. It could be a little shorter than that. We're certainly going to be involved in construction for all of the things that we're talking about there for 2 or 3 years. So somewhere 4 to 6 years. And that would be somewhere in $30 million, and then we could do the auditorium, we could do some more of the life cycle replacement work. We still haven't addressed everything that's identified in the Comprehensive Facilities Master Plan, but we think we will have been able to really tackle the most important things. So that's one way to slice the pie. Another way to do it would be to do a much smaller bond issue in April of 2020, about $65 million. And that would just do all of our phase 1 projects. So what we would do in the second phase then, we would have that larger bond issue. We would have had, the thought process was maybe we will have built additional support as a result of successful completion of all those phase 1 projects. And then we do a larger, almost $100 million bond issue. We would plan to do that more quickly, just in 2022. And that would give us the money to build a brand new Francis Howell North and to add the auditorium at Francis Howell High School. So another way to slice the pie, we would be able to do that without increasing our debt service levy in all of these scenarios. The third is a possibility that we talked about somewhat at our retreat, board retreat, and that is to determine everything that we need to do. So we've been focusing on phase 1 projects, but we know we have phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Those have been identified in the master plan. So we would get the funding that we need for all of those. Then we would structure the issuing of the bonds in such a way that we would never issue enough bonds that we would need to increase our debt service levy. So the payment of bonds that are currently in service combined with increases in assessed valuation, we would be able to stagger the issuance of those bonds that have been previously approved without increasing our debt service levy. Then we could begin to systematically address pretty much everything that's been identified in the Comprehensive Facilities Master Plan. So those are 3 ways to approach it. We probably could sit here tonight and come up with another half dozen or so. These are, I think, reasonable alternatives to begin a conversation about how we would like to approach it. And as Dr. Vanderpool indicated, the decision about Francis Howell North weighs heavily in this in terms of how we might structure what we want to do, depending upon what the board's overall direction is relative to Francis Howell North. There's some, even with the caveats that were introduced earlier, there's a significant difference between option 1 and option 3. And so how we structure that, what we choose to do, and then how we structure it could be important.
The last one. So just as we think through all of this, what are some next steps that we could consider? We've had a few suggestions regarding getting stakeholder groups together. The first option on this slide talks about a think tank, getting people who have been active in our community for many years together in early September, sharing some of these needs and prioritization of projects. You could get a larger stakeholder group together as well. That might involve representatives from all of the schools, as well as those representatives in a smaller think tank. And I believe we need to do a community survey, regardless of options, in order to determine support for a bond issue in general, but as well as some of these projects. And then the last option you have is just, you could decide tonight or at the next meeting without doing any stakeholder input or surveys, which of these options you believe is best, and we can move forward. I'll tell you, in informal polls, as I have conversations around the district, new high school versus renovated high school is going to be a debate in our community. Straw poll is at about 50-50.
Okay.
So I have a couple of questions about the presentation, just to make sure that I'm understanding everything. I believe that I learned some point in my history, or I could be making this up, that there's money available when you implement a shelter. are we aware of any of that?
FEMA
There's
money?
like some additional funding that can come in if we choose to.
That's a true statement, and I believe that those funds are still available. The difficulty is that really what they're doing is reimbursing you probably not 100% for the additional cost, which can be significant, to make it into the shelter.
Okay, so it's not a wash.
If you take the auditorium, and I am not basing this on a study of the work, but if you take the auditorium at Francis Howell North, we could build it not as if you can build it not as a safe shelter, you might build it for $7 million, but to make it a shelter, it would cost $9 million. And so you get $2 million from the federal government, but really, they're just paying you to make it a shelter. And that doesn't necessarily add any utility for the school district. That space has to be kept free, we can't use it for storage. It's not a space that, you have to keep it vacant in the event that there's some kind of a catastrophe that would necessitate its use. So it's there, we're heating and cooling it, and we've got some money for it. But they don't help to offset the cost of the auditorium itself. They're just really paying for the incremental cost of making it a shelter.
Okay, so if we would choose to go in that direction, then we would choose to seek that additional funding potentially.
And my understanding is, once you reach building a certain footprint for a single structure like that, you have to do it.
Okay,
So, yes, and we would seek whatever additional funding was available.
gotcha. The other question I had in the presentation, I didn't see anything listed about our new building that we just purchased. Was that part of the consideration?
The Westwood building?
Yes.
So there aren't any needs at that building. I think a few of the small things that needed to happen have been addressed. It's more more repairs than anything. So
Just now taking ownership, I wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, no, that's.
We had shared with the board at the time of purchase that there are some HVAC concerns that'll need to be addressed. Those are in the neighborhood of projects that would typically be done under our annual facilities budget. So we think that just as we're going to continue to maintain our other buildings over the course of whatever construction period, that Westwood would fall into that category. Now, every year that passes, a building's a little bit older, our needs have changed. That may change as we move forward, but at least initially speaking, we're in a pretty good spot with Westwood.
Okay, great, thank you. Or is there any other questions on the presentation? Let's address that first, and then we'll go into a conversation about next steps.
I don't know that it is easy enough to put in a PowerPoint or into the worksheet that you all have the dire need of some of the projects that are there. And so as superintendent, I can tell you there are days, and we had one this week, that I have concern about having school because of facility projects. And so we have to be very careful in our determination of projects to make sure that those are addressed and addressed soon. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a place where we don't have a building for 800 kids for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And that's not how we run a district. So I think we have to be sure that we get those projects through first and foremost moving forward.
Any questions on the presentation? Mr. Lane?
Union High School, you talked about replacing it. Where would we place it at? Would it continue to be on the house? I take my question back. He didn't like it.
I want everybody to hear it.
I think that there was a lot of discussions. We would definitely would be tearing down Building C, so that space would be available. But having Union so far away from the center of the district has its own issues. So I think if we were rebuilding or looking at purchasing an existing building like we did with Westwood and Heritage, we would probably try to find something as centrally located as possible. There's just some extra expense with travel for students, and so I don't know if it necessarily would go on that location.
Okay, thank you. And then, I don't know what it's called, DPDC, that would go to another area?
Well, there's several options. The new build that the architects gave us in the master plan actually had just adding on a small wing here to give them space for offices. But again, I think we'd want to look at the most cost-effective way. So is that purchasing an existing office space? Because this is just adult space. And it's much more flexible for us to find maybe an office building that we could utilize instead of trying to build a new structure. But we explored all those different ideas, and we just knew that it's going to be much more efficient for us to either build or purchase than it would be for us to try to fix building C.
Right, I just didn't hear location. I understand the replacement of that building.
To be determined.
Right, okay.
A lot of unknowns yet. So I have a question. When you were talking about the different options at North, you referenced that the refresh and renovation would bring the roof up to where the other high school roofs are. So we would still be dealing with issues. Is that correct? Or potentially still dealing with issues because we're taking roofs that have been this roof for this many years and this roof, and we're trying to put them all together, right?
Yep.
And that's how we have so many roof issues now at North.
Partly, I think that when you look at the work orders that the facilities department, not all of that's because of the rain coming in and the roofs connecting. Some of it could be because of the HVAC system has a.
There were a few work orders that actually were called in as roof work orders, but actually they were condensate lines off the HVAC systems on the interior that were actually leaking. So were they recategorized? Not necessarily, but all of those work orders weren't necessarily roof work orders.
Do they always put in a work order? Because I know they have, when it rains, close to 20 areas where they have trash cans collecting water.
And I think that there are a couple of spaces, especially right at the front of the building when you walk in, that it's been hard to identify where the leak is coming from. So we would hope with the amount of funds being the architects have estimated a complete roof rebuild with $4 million, that would give us enough to ensure that it is in as good a place as the other buildings. But it is such an odd structure.
I think overriding and your point, and I want to make sure that we don't overpromise here. You are still going to have connections between different building structures, and we can replace the roofing material, but the essential building structure is going to be the same, and you're going to have all those different joints. And as Dr. Vanderpool said, you have tile matching up with, rubber, and it will be complicated. I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that after we spend $4 million on roofing at Francis L. North, that we're not going to have a leak for 15 years. That's probably not feasible. Will we see a substantial reduction? I think that would be fair to say.
Board, any other questions on that information? Otherwise, we'll switch over to next steps.
I just want to clarify my numbers I wrote down. So you said for Francis L. North, the work orders were 15, and then 12 for Central, and then 8?
And 15 or 50?
15.
15, thank you.
But I do want to say, I don't think there's the one spot in the front of the building that seems to be a constant issue. They're probably not calling in every time. So there's definitely an area or two that we haven't been able to fix. So they're just working through it.
Yeah, we don't, unfortunately, we don't always get work orders put in the system. A lot of times it's phone calls, and we ask for the work orders just simply because, for this reason, in and of itself, that we can track things, but that
And that would be for
doesn't always happen.
every building, not just?
Right,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so maybe we just start discussing what we think the potential next steps are. So our last slide here, we have the opportunities for a think tank, a larger shareholder group, survey the community. We can add something new in there if someone's had a genius moment.
And you all could decide this month or next month which of these options you want without doing any of those steps and move forward.
So my concern with a survey of the community is, we're seeing all of this information. They're not going to have all of that. So if you say, well, would you like us to renovate for 61 million, or should we build new for 86? When they don't have all of the background and all of the information, the survey wouldn't be accurate because they wouldn't have the same information. That would just be a, what do you think?
I think we have in the past done short videos to highlight the kinds of issues or the problems that we have prior to taking the survey. The other thing you can do with the survey is to educate as people are surveying. So are you aware of that? And then to move to the next question, in order to remedy this, here are some options.
Was there any conversation about Henderson? You have to drive through the high school parking lot to get to an elementary school?
We did talk about that, and there is an option the architects presented to build an access road by Hackman, that it'd be narrow, but it would allow direct access to and from Henderson without having to go through North. That could happen no matter what. Like, whether we do any of these projects, we could add that road.
I like the idea of the survey, for sure. I think we need to hear what people feel, you know, and encourage, encourage the schools to get it to a thrust of their parents somehow, maybe like at conferences.
Public relations best practices would say that you should always do a statistically valid random sampling in advance of any bond issue. This survey can look like anything from what we can put together for free on SurveyMonkey and share with our community. The thing we know from past surveys like that is that even though 75% of the voters in our community don't have kids in the school district, when we put out a survey like that, only about 4 or 5% are those community members. So while it gives us a fairly decent idea of what our parents and staff are thinking, it doesn't necessarily give us an accurate view of what all of our registered voters are thinking. So what you do in terms of a more random sampling, scientifically valid random sampling, now you're talking about expenses from anywhere $12,000 to $25,000.
But don't you think our parents are the ones that are going to be motivated to vote? So even through
No,
That was a strategy
if
we
you
used
think about
previously.
like a Francis House.
good point.
So I think it's gonna depend on where you survey the parents. Because the parents, I would guess at Francis Hall High School are gonna say, absolutely, we need this new auditorium. So let's have this and not a new high school. So I think it's gonna matter too, where you're asking people.
You have to make it representative of those who are going to vote. And so I know the board did not like the last time we used an outside company to make sure we had a valid survey that represented everything across the district, but that's kind of what Matt is talking about. I believe there are members of our community and members of our board who think we need to move forward with a new Francis Hall North High School. And my hesitancy is twofold. You can't do that at the risk of those other projects because we have buildings that are in as bad of shape, especially in spots or worse to the point we can't have school. We have to make that a priority. And the other thing is we have to pass something. And so I think in order to determine if we can do that with a new high school, you're going to have to go out and have some more conversations. Because I'll tell you, just as I talk with people around the district, what do you think? We're going to be having these conversations. Half of the people are saying, and I do think education could get us a lot of votes. And so we haven't educated, but we also need to know that we have enough support to get something passed, whatever that is. I will say the third option is very appealing because it gets everything that we need done, gets us back on the map. If you look around or drive around other surrounding districts, you can notice a difference in our typical facilities, outside of some of our newer facilities like Hall High School and theirs. And so the last option is very appealing, and it's also going to be very difficult to pass. You're going to have to spell out that number of the total levy in your ballot language, and it will be a big number. Which makes it risky, however, all your needs get met.
The other thing we need to always keep in mind is that for a ballot initiative like this, we're not talking about 50% plus one, as we have in the past. We're talking about 4/7 or 57.14%.
How does the community react to no tax increase bond issue? I mean, I'm just curious because the
Well, they're
third
gonna
option.
react better than if it was a tax increase bond issue. So I do think that we believe that that will be something that will work for us. We will have members of our community that will say you could be reducing. And so I also think you have many members of the community that I've talked with that understand you've got aging buildings, there needs to be upkeep. Of course, we believe you need money to do that. And bond issues are easier to campaign because people can see tangible things that they're gonna get. And so, we struggled in our past operating levies to say exactly what it is that money was gonna get us because some of it was to have school. With a bond issue, it's much more clear about what our money will be going toward. So I think you have a no tax increase bond issue working for you, as well as the fact that it's a bond issue, which makes it more concrete to explain forward.
But option number 3, that we would be levying those bonds for 10 years or more.
Yes.
I mean, each of the so can we construct the wording to where it explains how that works in a way that isn't going to be super confusing?
And we have some sample ballot language. We took a look at that after the board retreat. I made some inquiries and we did get some sample ballot language and it would spell out how that would be done. I don't know that is a huge benefit. Remember that we're going to do everything we can to engage the community, but we're not going to reach everybody. And a lot of people are going to come to the poll, and the first thing they know about it was they look at it on the ballot, and they're going to see some big number at the top, and that's as much as they know, and they immediately put their pen to paper. And so the ballot is not the place to educate. I think we'll miss people there. But yes, the ballot will be clear about what our intention is.
And that ballot language is important, and we are able to specify in that ballot language, no tax rate increase.
But you also have to put that big number out there. It has to be in there. You can't just say maintain our current tax levy. We can't do that.
But could you do the phases? Could you do the numbers in phases?
The total is going to have to be included.
A total of X, which will be divided into A in 2020, B in 2022, and C in 2026. It would say something like that.
So we believe at this point you would have to put the total in there in the ballot language. Also, I think the board probably knows, but that would be pioneering ballot language. So this would not be typical language that you would see of a school bond issue on a ballot. You wouldn't see that amount because of how we would be doing it, and you wouldn't typically see something along those lines. So the total number will probably be a
300 million.
A high number that we haven't seen on ballots, school district ballots in the past.
And the challenge that we discussed at the retreat is the number itself, in terms of the scope of work that we want to do, is not that much different than what other area school districts have done. They simply have done it in smaller chunks. You get 100 here, you get 100 here, you get 100 here. But our particular concern is, given that we have Francis Howell North was such a major component of whatever we do, there's a definite risk in hanging your hat on approval of a subsequent issue to complete what you start in number 1. And so if you decide that you're going to do, take the extreme example, option 3, if you will, we're going to do a new high school. That's what we've decided we're going to do. And we're going to do bond issue in 2020, and we're going to do another bond issue in 2022, and we're going to do another bond issue in 2024, just as an example. You might get to 2022 and get a no, and you've got a half-built building. What am I going to do? Because I don't know that you would be able to, I don't know that you'd be successful putting all of your money into one single project on the hopes that in a couple of years we'll do everything else. Plus, as Dr. Hendricks-Harris mentioned, we have projects that are as significant or more than Howell North High School that have to be addressed. It can't just be waiting around for a couple of years on the hopes that at some point in the future we'll get money to address it. It's a challenge. We've had some very stimulating conversation
And lots
about
of
the
them.
best way to proceed.
So for some of our next steps, to be forthcoming, I like all of the ideas. I like that we start with a think tank, that we start getting some feedback from a variety of groups. And part of that is about how to educate our community, what direction should we be going in, and then from there, take it to the larger stakeholder group. Having meetings across the districts, we have such a large district, and getting additional feedback. I think it's multi-layered.
I guess I'm looking at this a little different. I agree that we need input, and the input we need from the community, I believe, is this something that you can support? Is this something that you believe in? Is this something that you trust us on? If I need an attorney, I'm not going to go out and ask the community for a survey on how do I get the best advice. If I need an accountant, I'm going to go ask an accountant. I'm not going to ask a room full of people. I believe that all these people have a valid opinion, and I'm not, minimizing that in any way, shape, or form. However, in this room, that table right there are the people that understand the educational needs of what we need to educate our kids. If we get 500 people in here from the community, everybody's going to have an opinion, but they don't have the expertise. And I believe it's up to the district to formulate a plan that is best for our kids, best for the education of our kids, for not only this year, but years and years to come. And I've been doing facilities for 15, 16 years. And I've toured all these buildings. And if we're not building a new Francis Howell North, we're not doing what's best for kids, in my personal opinion.
So how does that differ from our previous tax increase request?
Well, if the
Tax increase.
tax increases are different.
No, but it's providing for the future of our students and evaluating the direction for the education and needs of our students. So my point is we took that and we took that to our community and it was not successful. How do we make sure that this is successful? I agree that it's a no tax increase, but what is the community going to accept for the right level? Which options, which levels, which project? And I don't want to go to that granular detail with a million people, don't misunderstand that, but I think it's very important that we get a lot of community buy-in and feedback. We haven't been successful in providing for the education of our students with regards to revenue in this community. So I'm just curious how it's.
I think there's a big difference.
I guess we could argue that the proposals we had in the past, several of those were probably dead on arrival. And I guess you could argue that we didn't demonstrate a need after they failed with our budgeting and our practices and stuff. This is providing the physical structure that allows us to educate kids. This provides the lights, this provides the HVAC, this provides the classroom, this provides the electric that we're going to need, not only in needs for this year, but 10, 20 years to come. That's what this is going to do. Everybody, these are the needs that we have. This is a no tax increase, which is much more palatable to the majority of the people. And I think that our community understands the needs that we have with the large number of buildings, the large number of square foot, the age of what we have. I mean, I replaced my air conditioner on my house this year, and I understand what that costs. Everybody has replacing faucets, replacing carpets, replacing these things. And I think the community does understand those needs. And when you have the large number of square footage that we have, I think that they understand that. However, to ask them to tell us what we need to do, I kind of agree with Michelle that we're asking people, and they don't have that expertise. They have opinions, and they are all valid opinions, but they don't have the expertise.
I don't disagree that they don't have that expertise. I'm trying to figure out how to best get them educated and engaged, though, so they will come to the polls and that they will vote for this opportunity. That's where my concern is. So
I think there's a big difference in my mind of my taxes for the school are gonna go up 20% or 15% or whatever it is. So out of my pocket, I'm going to spend this much more money every year versus this money is not going to cost me anything else. Sure, I won't get a reduction anytime soon because we are gonna continue with that, but in my mind, there's a big difference between the two.
So, there is a huge difference. But I do see that population of our community who's gonna look at this large number if we go for option 3 and say they don't need that amount, they don't need that. They're fine with what they're doing, they're making do. If we put up 300 million on the ballot, that's what they're gonna zoom in on and say they don't need that. I mean, people told me to my face over and over and over that we're fine with chalkboard and chalk. We have a large amount of individuals in our community who just don't understand because they're just removed from today's classroom. So that's my concern about doing option 3.
I guess I think about it.
There is a difference. There's a huge difference from my taxes aren't going up. I'm on a limited income. I'm not paying more out of pocket, but they're gonna see that and they're gonna say they don't need that. So we're still gonna have to educate regardless. I think knowledge is power. The more information we can get out there. I do like the idea of a survey, larger stakeholder survey. We want to know where the community is going before it's a big decision. I would like the larger stakeholder group, everywhere, north, our entire community, to get their opinions. And the way to do that would be to educate them with what we were just, this PowerPoint here, there's little snippets here, there, and there. We can educate, we can do that.
When was the last time we passed a bond issue?
2008,
Do you know what the amount was?
How much money was it?
78.5 million.
Wasn't it 87? We were
78.
going out for 90 something and then we lowered it, right? At the last minute?
78.5.
So do we think the average voter really knows the difference? Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but when you start talking about these huge numbers, do you really think people say no to 300 million instead of 72 million, or that they really think of the different? How many voters do we think will actually even understand the difference?
Well, there are some of our stakeholders who don't understand the difference between a tax levy and a bond issue. And all they'll see is that we're asking for money for the 4th time in 5 years.
Exactly.
I don't know, it'll say right on it that it's not increasing taxes, so I don't.
But not everybody stops to read that part.
All they see is that number.
They're gonna see Francis Hall and money.
Right.
So if we get approved once, then we get stuck on the second one, then what do we do?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, and that's I think how you have to sell this, why we're going out at one time, just, again, my opinion, but this is why we're saying, this is why we're going out, because we know we have all these needs, and so we're going to put these things on a schedule. I think it's explaining it and educating people.
So I think it's important to understand, do we want input or do we only want output of a message? Are we looking for input from our community? Or are we only gonna look at education?
What kind of questions would you ask in a survey? I'm just trying to think through this.
Sure, and I understand Mr. Haynes' point about the experts are here, we know what's best. The question wouldn't be, how should we spend the money? The question would be, here are the things we've identified, would you support the district at this level? Would you support the district at this level? Or would you support the district at this level? It would also allow us, hopefully, to identify some hot button issues, so then as we developed that communication plan, we could concentrate on those areas that we knew resonated with our stakeholders.
Or the barriers that we would have to overcome.
Or the misconceptions we might have to correct.
And if we haven't learned anything from the failed tax increases that we went after, was one of the strongest messages we got back is you didn't ask me my opinion, you gave me what you thought was best. And I just, we really have fought with community input.
We did a survey.
We did.
With one of them.
Yeah, the first time.
And to your point, Mrs. Cope, I do think that is the challenge. We talked a little bit about it tonight, but I would agree with Mr. Hain that we need to define the scope. And then we can ask people about a specific scope. But I don't envision that it would be a successful venture to have a laundry list and try to survey people about, should we do the boiler loop at Becky David or add a driveway at Henderson? That's, you'll never make any headway. Nobody, they can't comprehend it.
Right, that's not
I think this group, the people at this table, need to determine what the scope is, and then we can ask specific questions, and maybe there could be some variability. We'd like to do all of this plus, kind of what we did tonight, option A or option B relative to Francis L. North. What do you think? And that might inform a specific decision about the high school. But
So let me try to reframe what I was trying to say. I think I'm saying the same thing you, with the think tank to put together what that plan really looks like, what's in, what are our options, and kind of formulate everything, and then take it to the community in larger groups to litmus test it to see, is that acceptable and at what level? I felt like I was saying something similar.
I'm on your page.
That I agree, we have to, I don't want a laundry list of, is this in, absolutely not. But coming up with that package, and that framework in a think tank, a small group of stakeholders, and then taking it to a larger group.
Well, and I think so Michelle, you mentioned, will people know the context of that amount in option 3? Does that matter? And, I would say there will be a % of our population that number is not gonna be something, they have no context. They don't know if that's a big number or a small number, that will be. And we also know that we have some who are gonna hone right in on it, and it's gonna be a no just because of the number and might not even read the needs or the phases. And so I think when you go out to figure out where people lie, what work do you have left to do in order to make it go, so 90% of people come back and say, that's too big of a number for me, we know we can't go out for option 3. But 90% of the people come back and say, I don't really think that, I understand that you would need to maintain your levy because of aged buildings. I think you could move forward with it. But it's too risky right now. We can't do what we've done in the past and go out and fail. We have to go out and be successful at something, or we're gonna have a crisis situation in our facilities.
I guess my fear is, what if we survey and they say, no, I don't want you to spend any more money on your facilities, leave them how they are, get pencils and, chalkboards and chalk.
Then you wait to shut down Becky David for 12 weeks without an education transport.
But what I'm saying is, we do this survey, and that's what our community comes back and tells us, then what are we gonna do? We're just gonna say, well, we don't care what the survey says, because we have to move forward with these things. So that's where I'm at with the survey. I mean, I do know we need our community support. We need their input, but I don't think people have the context on the projects or the dollar amount to even make a survey valid when it comes to the issue. I mean, I suppose if you made them watch a 2-minute video first about the raining in the high school and the fact that Becky David may shut down any day, those sorts of things, But if they don't know those things to say, how much money would you support? This much, or this much? They're gonna say the bottom one, whatever that number is, of course. I mean, human nature. Ones don't spend more than you need.
So what do you think the next steps are then?
I think if you want my personal opinion would be that as a board, with the input from the administration and the folks that have been working on the facilities committee for many, many years, that we would decide, what do we need to do to move forward? And how do we need to set our district up facility-wise for the next 10 to 15 years? And then make a decision based on what we decide we need to do. That's just my input. I think it's a different thing when you can put a specific to the number. Whereas when we went out for the tax levies before, it was, first we needed this amount, then we needed this amount, then we needed this amount. We didn't get any of them and we're still okay. I think it's a different thing when we're gonna say, we're gonna spend approximately this much on this, approximately this, and all that money is somewhat earmarked, but it's over a long period of time. Didn't the ambulance district do something similar to that?
It's kind of where we got the idea from, is their last, the language was written similar to what we would have to propose.
And how does it work? Is it the same kind of rules with a tax levy and a bond issue as far as the promotion and the campaigns and all of that sort of stuff?
Yes.
Gotcha. So we would have to have an outside committee.
Yes.
There
Okay.
is one established that we would be having a conversation, or there's probably more than one established at this point that we'd be having a conversation with about support.
So maybe that's the next step, is to talk to those outside groups and see what their thoughts are. And if any of them jump on it and say, absolutely, we know you need this, let's go do it together. Just a thought.
I got lost, outside groups.
Because we'll have to have a committee.
For a campaign, thank you.
Yeah, I think, we know of 2 PACs, you could bring them in here and have a conversation.
I know we had some conversation at the retreat about timing, and I sensed a general consensus from the board that April 2020 would be desirable. No commitment, but kind of that was where we were targeting. So just a reminder that to get something on the April ballot, the board has to take definitive action by the middle of January 2020. So we're middle of August. Just
Setting the time.
that's the other thing, is as we're deciding our course of action, we have to remember that we have fall break coming up. We're going to have a fall break, and we're going to have a Thanksgiving break, and Christmas is there, and mid-January, the board has to vote on something so that we can officially place something on the ballot.
Mr. Lane, what was your opinion?
I'm still undecided on this. It's a lot.
Mr. Lane?
I want a new high school, but I think I lean toward option 1, reading between the lines.
I apologize, what I'm asking about is what do we think our next steps are?
Oh, I still
Let me
think I
change the
like
slide
option
for you.
1.
Yeah. We need to identify what our next steps are. We need to get out of the gate.
Well, we're meeting the 12th, and invite the stakeholders in that night with
What are we meeting the 12th about? Is that
Brownies
strategy?
with the board.
That's brownies with the
Brownies,
board, and then our
let's
But the
feed
brownies
them
with the
brownies
board.
and ask them what they think about.
But we're already meeting, it's already established, but at least start to bring the community in. We're going to put something on the ballot, is my general feeling. Option 1, 2, or 3, but we could start the communication there. But I think we have to communicate, in some form, through survey. We didn't mention teachers, we need the staff. I think somehow survey them. I mean, if they're not in support, I would think Henderson and North would jump on it, right? But we need their input. This is what we're proposing, and not to vote on it. This is what we're doing. What are your thoughts of the bond issue? Period. Not exactly what it is. I think that's their reflective of us decision there. So I think, we need to network with the community in some way.
Ms. Stiglitz, what do you think? Next steps.
I think our next steps, I like the idea of a think tank. I think bringing in some of the stakeholders who not always agreed with some of the things that the district has done in the past is a really good way to start, because I don't think we're going to be able to get anywhere until we make sure that we're including everybody into that discussion. I'm not sure a survey is going to tell us what we need. I'm going to go back to just our survey tonight that we did from our strategic plan. You sent out 100 and you only got 30 responses back. I'm not sure that even if we send out something that we're going to get the responses back that we need, that we all. So I don't know if we want to survey that, if that's really the direction we need to go. I think we need to look at bringing in the people that are looking at us that we're spending, to bring them in first. That's my opinion.
And that's an education.
And that's education.
You know.
Mr. Hain? Next step.
Well, I think that we need the smaller option instead of the larger one first, and then we would roll out the results of the smaller one to the larger group. I mean, we got to get input. I mean, I shared my opinion with many people in this room that this process should have been started a long time ago, and I would have done things a little differently, but I mean, better late than never. And I guess one of the other things that I keep going back to is, I mean, there were a few of us in this room that were here and did the 2008 bond issue. And out of that bond issue, I mean, we've got people saying, we can't do it because, oh my gosh, we're going to spend a large percentage of that on Howell North. Well, we had, what, 78.5 million, whatever it was. And what percentage of that was for the Howell High project? About 60 million of the 78, correct?
A little over 50 million.
Yeah. And so it was a very similar type of bond issue that I guess it was a different time, a different group of people, and we said this is what we need to do, this is what we're going to do, and we went out and did it, as opposed to saying, well, this is what we need to do, but we don't think we can do it, so let's settle for something. I'm not in the mood to settle. When it affects the education of our kids.
Mrs. Lang?
I believe we need to do the think tank, and just like Patrick mentioned, we got September 12th. Rose?
You could postpone that steering committee if you wanted to do a September 12th think tank in lieu of, you could not get all three of those things done in one night.
Right, that's fair.
But you have a date set aside and it
Yes, I
push
forgot
this up
about
to
this
being
thing,
most
yeah.
urgent and move forward.
Can we get a video of like potential nightmare scenarios that we're facing and start getting that information out? Because it's real. It's not scare tactic. It's not, I mean, it's real.
Yeah. What worked in our favor for Francis Howell High School is that the failings of that building were readily apparent. You had buildings that were not connected, so kids were outside a large portion of the day. Just the physical appearance of the building was quite different from the rest of our facilities. The unique problem we have now is that a picture of a rooftop unit doesn't excite anybody. But the failure of a rooftop unit can cause us not to have school. So I think that the nature of what we're doing are the non-sexy things that are absolutely necessary. You know, we can't give you a picture of the boiler loop at Becky David, but if it fails, we're out of business.
I think we could prepare some scenarios. I'm not sure pictures are going to help, but I do think with help from the facilities department, we could come to that meeting with, here's some scenarios of some things that could happen if we don't get something passed.
We have lots of
And I
data.
think to Mike's point about wanting what's best for kids, there's not a person around this table who doesn't want what's best for kids. I think it's a matter of how do we get what's best for kids going and moving forward at this point. It's a challenge to understand the level of support we're gonna get for our community. That's where we're all at. And we can't, it's gonna be, we need to know we have full support of our community going into a bond issue, regardless of the level of projects that you're taking on.
And regardless how we figure that out. How, is it a survey, is it bringing people in? That's what we need. We need to make sure we have our community behind us. I think that's what we're all in agreement on. Now, how do we get that, or how do we find that?
So it sounds like temperature of the board is to use our brownies with the board to invite a variety of stakeholders. And I think we have to be proactive in invitation. Brownies with the board in the past has been flyers and announcement. I think we have to engage specific communities and ask them to come join us.
And the reasoning behind it.
And yes, and the reason behind it.
Get a flyer.
So what I'm hearing is it would be a smaller group, maybe people that have been active in campaigns one way or another in the past, and maybe a little additional representation, but, and then we might take that work to a larger group, or we might take it for survey, or we might just go out.
I'm not sure I'm getting a feel from the board that a survey is where we're going for sure, but maybe the larger group.
What if we did this? What if we not drafted the exact survey, but provided the board with some solid examples of the kinds of questions, because I do think there's some confusion there, in order to help make a decision about a survey.
I think that would be important too, and if we're doing internal or an external. So if there's budget line item involved or not.
Like I said, we know we need it, so if the survey comes back and they don't want it, we don't have a choice.
Have to change, yeah, if they come back and they don't want it, then we're just gonna have to change our way we approach it.
And you might not go out in April.
Which is scary.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one more option that Mr. Dykeman has been advocating for, and that is not exactly a survey, but something called Thought Exchange that Parkway has used. It's more of a chat with votes about support regarding comments. Is that fair?
It's a conversation with your community that you facilitate online, and it's basically your people are answering a question, but then they're also rating other people's responses. So some things come to the top.
We use that at Bowen. I understand that.
It's a little more anecdotal, and it's not the scientific representative sampling, but it is another way to take the pulse of your community.
And if we were to move forward with a purchase of Thought Exchange, we would be able to use that for many other things. So there are many things the board has said, get some input on. You could just throw that out there on Thought Exchange.
What kind of dollar amount is that program?
I'm fearful that we weren't prepared to bring that forward tonight.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. It's in the range of $20,000 a year.
But I think the board could go look at, we could send you a link to the Parkway conversations leading up to their bond issue,
Of example
where
of
Thought
Parkway.
Exchange was used.
The difference is, again, is that this is a self-selecting system. So this is not, you're not taking a random sampling of all demographics and all geographic areas. This tends obviously to lean more heavily towards stakeholders with a vested interest, so your parents and your staff members.
I like that idea, at least kind of looking at what it looked like for Parkway, and I think that would help us, or help me anyway.
Yeah, so I think we got a couple decisions. Brownies with the board, open to everyone, but some specific invited stakeholders, and more information on the Parkway communication, social tool, software tool.
And we'll draft some
Survey.
survey questions for the board to consider whether or not you want to move forward with the survey.
We have a draft of a survey. Facility survey.
All right, so is that all that we have come to an agreement on this evening? Did I miss anything?
Small group on September 12th, not moving forward with the strategic plan steering committee at that time. We're going to talk about an issue.
A targeted invitation list, or are we casting our nets on the waters and inviting everybody to come?
I think we're beginning with an invite only and letting people, I mean, obviously, if the board's here, we'll have to have an open meeting, but. Sounds like we wanted to invite specific people who were active in the past.
Right.
And like your PTA president, you know, each building. You know, those leaders.
And then the follow-up meeting might be more of a kickoff, everybody come.
Yeah, I think that's probably where we'll lead to, but I really want to see what we find out on the 12th. Everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Anything I missed?
All right, we have direction.
With that, superintendent comments.
Ooh, it's getting late, I'll see what I can put back here. School's in full swing. I've been out to many buildings, have been very impressed with what's already going on in classrooms. The climate at the buildings is very positive. On the other hand, you might be aware we've had a difficult start with our new transportation operation. There are many factors that got us off to a bumpy start. I want to assure the board that transportation is working many hours before and after routes as well as weekends to attempt to rectify issues and concerns. By all reports, there are improvements every day. Mr. Supple and I will continue to monitor the situation and update the board. As was mentioned in my letter to our parents, we are expediting hiring, providing supports from other departments, seeking input on routes, and making adjustments as quickly as possible. I want to thank those who have gone above and beyond to support us through this change. I've enjoyed getting to know our new transportation department personnel, and I still believe in the long run we're going to be happy with this decision. Friends Howell is ranked as the best school district in St. Charles County and the number 11th best district in Missouri according to the 2020 Best Schools in America list released by Niche. The state ranking is 2 spots higher than last year, and with more than 500 public schools in the state, it puts us in the top 3% in Missouri. All 3 high schools are ranked in the top 50 schools in Missouri. In Missouri, and in St. Charles County, France Howell Middle Schools are all ranked in the top 10, and France Howell School District also received 7 of the top 10 ranked elementary schools. Rachel Wilcox, a first grade teacher at Independence, has been named Regional Teacher of the Year by DESE. She was selected as one of 10 recipients in the St. Louis region and one of 34 from across the state who are now eligible for consideration for the Missouri Teacher of the Year. Wilcox was honored at the 2019 France Howell School District Teacher as the France Howell School District Teacher of the Year and delivered an inspirational speech at the kickoff last week. France Howell School District has partnered with St. Charles Community College to offer the early college program to all France Howell high school students. The program offers high school students the opportunity to earn transferable college credits at St. Charles Community College while still enrolled in high school. When enrolled in the early college program, students will take college coursework on the campus of St. Charles Community College with textbooks and curriculum taught by the community college professors. Students can earn enough credits to complete part or all of an associate's degree while concurrently earning a high school diploma. Students and their families will be able to pay a reduced tuition rate, books, and fees. In July, Missouri Governor Mike Parsons signed into law legislation barring school districts from starting the school year more than 14 calendar days before the first Monday in September. For 2021, schools may not start before August 24th. Therefore, the calendar committee will be reconvened to make challenges to the calendar to meet the new state requirements. The committee also will create the 21-22 calendar. The new calendar survey is currently open for stakeholder feedback. To close out a successful 2019 summer school camp schedule, the middle school app camp students adventured through the world of coding and app development. The students completed a variety of tasks throughout the camp to learn how to code. By the end of the week, they had the opportunity to create an application of their own that could be published on the Google Play Store. 2 2019 France Howell North grads competed in the National Educators Rising competition in Dallas, Texas over the summer. Austin Sharif placed first in lesson planning and delivery arts, and Abby Seams placed 5th in lesson planning and delivery.
Excellent, thank you. Board, next on our agenda is Board of Education request. Any requests to bring forward at this time? Okay. Let's quickly take a look at our upcoming meetings. If we take a look at our September 19th meeting, any additions or corrections?
Do you want to put something about the bond issue on at that point, or it'll still be too soon?
It's September 19th, it's after the 12th. I mean,
I think we need to
continue the conversation.
I think we can have a conversation, definitely.
Counselor Tex right hearing. Do we have a workshop scheduled for that meeting?
You could do part 2 of this workshop if you wanted to.
Correct, that's why I was asking if
We
there's
don't have
anything else that we were affecting.
Want it in workshop format next time?
Yeah.
Yes? All right, anything else on the 19th? Okay, let's take a look at our October meeting. That's when we're gonna have our final data discussion.
November.
November.
It says academic workshop. What is that?
He changed, I thought you changed it
Are we moving that out?
because we were gonna get
So
the,
we're gonna get the final on October 8th, which is that Tuesday.
Right.
And in order to put it together in a coherent way,
Totally
we
fine with
could
that.
have something, but I think November makes more sense.
Is that what our work session academic workshop on October was originally?
I would imagine that's
Okay.
what, we'd move that to November.
Works perfect.
perfect. And then if we need part 3, we can go to part 3.
We'll also have the school calendar as a workshop in November, so that'll be exciting.
We get both?
You'll get both.
Woo-hoo! Bring a sleeping bag.
Yeah.
All right, any other additions, corrections for October 10th? Okay, good, okay. Board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a first and second, all of those in favor?
Aye.
All of those opposed? Motion carries.